Welcome to the Northern Region Advisory Council meeting. This meeting is being held in person in the Weber County Commission chambers in Ogden, Utah, as well as being streamed live on YouTube. This is a public forum allowing you to express your opinions and proposals of the management of wildlife in our state. The RAC considers your ideas, opinions, and proposals and reports them to the Wildlife Board. The Wildlife Board, not the RAC, is charged with setting wildlife policy for our state. While we're here, we all have lots of our opinions and ideas, and we ask that during this discussion tonight that everyone treat each other with respect, that we be thoughtful of others, and that we, again, if we see that there's any rude comments or anything that's going on, that you may be asked to leave. We're going to begin by introducing ourselves as the RAC. My name is Justin Oliver. I'm serving as the chairman of this board, or of this committee, and we're going to start down on the right with Ryan.
My name's Ryan Brown, public at large.
Brad Buchanan, sportsman.
Matt Clark at large.
Randy Hutchison at large.
Kevin McLeod at large.
Mike Lauder, sportsman's rep.
Paul Chase, Forest Service.
Darren Perry, Shoshone Nation.
Nikki Waymit, non-consumptive users.
David Earl, ag.
All right, today we also have excused right now, Junior Goring is not here. We also want to recognize that we have Jamie Butler online and also Emily Jensko, and we are anticipating possibly having Casey Snyder join in. We're waiting to hear how his legislative meetings special session goes tonight, if he's to see if he'll be able to join us. We also want to welcome and recognize division, employees of the division and their staff. We have here Heather Talley, the Upland Game Coordinator. We have Jason Jones, the Migratory Game Bird Coordinator. Avery Cook, the Upland Game Project Leader. Charles Lyons, the Assistant Attorney General. And then I believe Chad Wilson will be joining us. Is he online as well? Right. He'll be joining us virtually as well. We also want to welcome the public and thank all of you who are here today for joining us. And we look forward to hearing your comments and your comments and questions. Everyone here in the meeting, all of our members have had the opportunity to watch the meeting online and to be up to date on all of the proposals. I hope everyone had a chance to watch those. And so those who are here in public will have an opportunity to comment and ask questions, but those watching obviously won't have that opportunity. We are going to, the process will go, I guess, as follows. We will first address an agenda item. After I'll turn the time over for RAC to, we'll first let the member of the division who is proposing that agenda item be able to clarify anything. We'll then open to questions for members of the RAC. Following the questions from the RAC, we'll then open up to questions from the public. After we've heard questions from the public, we will then turn the time over to Ben Nadowski, who will then be able to give us the feedback from the comments that we receive from the public. After that, we will then go to the comments from the public who are here. And once we've heard from them, we will then have discussion from the RAC, and at that time make motions and be able to vote on them. With that, is there anything that I'm missing? I think that's where we're at. So I would like to begin. We'd like to begin by. I hope everyone had an opportunity to look over the minutes from our last meeting, and go over those. Are there any questions on those minutes? I know that Jody enjoyed the 14 hours of typing them, so she's going to ask everyone to not be so long-winded this meeting. Use simple, small words as well. All right. Okay. If you've had a chance to look over those, the minutes, hopefully you've also looked at the agenda. If there's not any questions, I'd entertain a motion to approve both the agenda and the minutes from last week.
I'll make a motion that we approve both the minutes and the agenda
From last
time.
Okay.
I'll second.
All right, we have a second by Brad. So I will just call a verbal vote on this one. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Passes unanimously. Thank you. All right. Let's see. I'm now going to turn some time over to Ben for a minute. I'm gonna let him try to navigate through what the wildlife board's last meeting and the minutes from that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It might just be faster if you go back and watch the video from the meeting, but I'll try and cruise through. These are like 6 pages front and back of motions for the last wildlife board. So this is miserable for you. I apologize. It's also miserable for me. First motion that passed unanimously was to approve the permit numbers for the general season buck deer permits on the following units: Chalk Creek with 2,000, East Canyon with 1,700, Morgan South Ridge at 1,400, Camas at 1,700, and Ogden at 1,900. The next motion, which passed 4-3 with the chair breaking the tie, was to approve the permit numbers for the Central Region units as presented, with the exception of the Oker Stansbury to be cut to 2,000. Next motion passed 5-1, which was to approve 0 permit increases in the Southern Region, staying with the 2022 permit numbers, with the exception of the Pine Valley going to 2,300. The next motion failed with the chairman breaking the tie, which was to approve the permit numbers for the Southeastern region as presented. Next motion passed, again with the chair breaking the tie, to approve the permit numbers for the Southeastern region as presented, with the exception that the LaSalle Mountains stay at 1,200. Next motion passed unanimously to approve the permit numbers for the Northeastern region as presented, with the exception of the Wasatch Mountains East being changed to 4,250. Next motion passed unanimously to increase the Fillmore Oak Creek limited entry permits by 5 and not the 11 as proposed by the division. Next motion passed unanimously to approve the remaining permit numbers as presented by the division. For the once-in-a-lifetime permit recommendations, this motion passed unanimously to accept the once-in-a-lifetime permit recommendations as presented by the division. For bull elk permit recommendations, motion passed unanimously to look into mandatory tooth reporting, that the division look into mandatory tooth reporting and place that item on the action log. Next motion was the next motion passed unanimously to approve permit recommendations as presented by the division, including the additional 250 draw-only youth bull elk permits. For the buck pronghorn permit recommendations, following motion passed unanimously, that we accept the buck pronghorn permit recommendations as presented. For the antlerless permit recommendations, motion was made and later withdrawn to approve as presented by the division, with the exception of the 4 increases and that those stay at the 2022 levels. Following a motion passed 4-2 to approve the antlerless permit recommendations as presented. For the CWMU antlerless permit recommendations, the following motion was made and later withdrawn to reduce the number of antlerless permits by 50% across the board for 2023. Following motion passed unanimously. This is a long one. That we ask the division to form a CWMU advisory committee to review the rule and bring recommendations back to the board in June 2024. The committee should consider if the rule is equitable for both the public and the private parties. It needs to be an incentive-based program to encourage CWMUs to fulfill antlerless harvest. Tools need to be in place to encourage CWMU operators and the division to obtain necessary harvest for unit objectives. The rule needs to address non-contiguous lands and set requirements for trade lands. Land traded needs to be comparable to be fair to both the public and the operator. Trade lands need to be posted with a common sign such that the public can easily recognize it as such. If public tags increase or decrease, then CWMU tags should do the same. This is to be placed on the action log. Next motion passed 5-1 to approve the Summit Point request for 6 cow elk permits, which included 3 public and 3 private permits. Next motion passed unanimously to approve the remainder as presented by the division. We're halfway there, hang in there. For the CWMU rule amendment, following motion passed unanimously to approve CWMU rule amendments as presented by the division. For big game rule amendments, motion passed unanimously to approve the big game rule amendments as presented by the division. Motion passed unanimously to approve peep mounted single lens clarifiers and verifiers for archery. Sorry, we're into the technology recommendations now. The motion passed 4-2 to approve the two-way radio ban portion of the presentation. And, oh, I'm sorry, that motion was amended to apply to restricted weapons and hams hunts specifically. So to apply the two-way radio ban to restricted weapons and hams hunts only. That motion passed 4-2. And passed unanimously to allow matchlock ignition and friction lock to be included in the restricted muzzleloader definition. And the next motion passed unanimously to approve the remainder of the recommendations as presented by the division. I hope you don't have any questions.
That was a very long meeting for those who attended that. And a lot of discussions. Was there any specific questions, any of those things that stood out to anyone? All right. We're now also going to turn the time over to Ben to give us a regional update. If we go over our minutes, it's because of that long, if we go too long of a meeting, it's because of that report right there.
I thought that was pretty efficient. Drink your monster though, because I'm getting parched.
Okay, so you can have it.
Just waiting for the presentation.
You can do this in less than 3 minutes. You can have that monster.
Should I open it now?
So we did have a presentation and it's gone. No, because you downloaded it on my laptop. There.
Actually,
You download. You download. Oh, you're like this.
go.
Got it.
Here we go.
Perfect.
You're on.
Thank you.
Welcome, sorry.
No problem. Okay, let's go ahead and the next slide. Okay, we reported on some of the deer feeding last meeting for the wildlife section. We wrapped that up with 49 sites for feeding for a total of 5,800 deer fed and 511 tons of feed. Our wildlife biologists are moving on to spring deer classifications as well as shark tail and sage grouse let counts. Next slide. We are still picking up quite a bit of winter kill. We had a huge backlog of roadkill and winter die-off that we're making good progress on, but it seems like when they go to pick one up, they got to pick up a few on the way. So take a little bit of time, but they're getting caught up. We're definitely getting hit with depredation issues, so we're cycling through payments for the damage that occurred during the winter, and our biologists and depredation technicians are out doing spring counts on fields as well. Next slide. With the winter wrapping up, we're just kind of moving into flood season. So Ogden Bay WMA has probably been the most busy with Farmington Bay falling behind. We'll get to that in a bit, but they've got really high water and flooding's an issue every single day. There's constant debris and tree removal at all of our diversion points. So we've got heavy equipment and crews on site doing removal, sometimes hourly. So a lot of our habitat projects like weed spraying and food plots and shrub plantings are kind of getting started, but they're going to be reduced at the end of the day because of high water. Same with Phragmites grazing. So we'll continue with our grazing plan, but we're going to see less grazing due to high water. Again, the entire Ogden Bay WMA is closed to all public access as a result of flood danger. Slide. Similar situation at Farmington Bay. We've got Farmington Creek flows are increasing, especially as temperatures increase. We've been very proactive with emergency diversions and overflows in place. We're coordinating really closely with Davis County and surrounding landowners every day to make sure that we are prepared to receive as much flood water as possible. Kind of like Ogden Bay, they've got constant debris removal underway, and we've got a heavy equipment crew on site handling that for us. Next slide. Just a couple of the emergency diversions that we put into place. These are sometimes they're real-time decisions that are being made, but we're making decisions that we think are in the best interest of not only for wildlife, but for the communities that neighbor us. Next slide. For the Great Salt Lake, we wrapped up our spring waterbird surveys. The regional shorebird survey for the Pacific Flyway was complete with over 100 volunteers. Good news is the lake's up about 5 feet, and salinity levels as a result of the dilution is now below 13%. I think the last time when we were starting to get really, really concerned and starting to see negative effects, we were in the 19% range. So that's good news. But the brine shrimp population is still lagging behind, but we expect that to catch up. And Jamie, if you're listening, John Luft wanted me to tell you that he put in the picture of Pink Floyd for you as a throwback.
I was going to ask you if you were like in 1996.
Right. Always. Okay, next slide. So for our law enforcement section, if any of you have had an opportunity to use the Deadhead app, we hope that has been helpful. It's been hugely helpful for our enforcement team. Just on the day that the shed antler closure lifted, we had 60 elk reported in the northern region alone. Here's a picture of the Hennifer Echo WMA during, I don't know what time it was taken. It was in the middle of the night. You can see all the headlamps on the hillside, but we had almost 200 vehicles in the parking lot in the dark at the WMA to look for shed antlers. So normally our officers would be going to each of those deadheads and confirming whether it was a case of poaching or not, and it's a very rare circumstance that it is. So this Deadhead app has been hugely helpful, and we've cycled through 260 or more deadheads statewide since that app was in place. That's a ton of time that officers can put into discretionary patrol or other priority actions. Just in the WMA and shed antler patrols from January to May, our officers in our region alone put in 2,266 hours patrolling our WMAs and protecting winter range. They made 1,791 individual contacts and issued 76 violations. Thanks to those guys for all that work. Slide. Our aquatics crew is very excited, as you can see by their bolding and underlining of water finally being open and stocked. They've stocked over 2 million walleye fry at Willard, 2,000 tiger muskie fingerlings in Newton, tens of thousands of catchable rainbows at East Canyon, Rockport, Echo, Hiram, and more. And we've stocked Bear Lake with over 100,000 cutthroat trout as well. Our crew has also been out and has completed the electrofishing for Manaway Reservoir. If anybody wants to get out and do some fun work, but can't get away from work during the day, these are nighttime electrofishing surveys, and they're pretty fun. They also conducted gillnet surveys at Hiram and Bear Lake. The bottom picture here is a picture of a Columbia spotted frog egg mass. They've conducted frog surveys in Summit County, Boreal toad surveys in Grouse Creek. And they've transferred June sucker from grow-out ponds that we oversee in the region here to Utah Lake to bolster that population. Slide. Our outreach section hosted a women's fishing tournament at East Canyon Reservoir. We had 60 women that participated, and they caught a ton of fish from shore. The report was lots of big fish, including a 24-inch rainbow that weighed 4 pounds. So if you're looking to get out and fish from shore, the timing's good at East Canyon. Next slide. We do still have habitat vacancies, the same ones we reported last time. We're still looking to hire our assistant habitat manager, our assistant maintenance specialist, and we have seasonal employees at Hardware Ranch that we're trying to hire. So hopefully we'll get those taken care of for you for the next meeting. Next. And we have a team at the office that's busy. Our Atlas application period starts on June 7th. They've helped us staff up with seasonal technicians, 14 so far, more to come. And they're doing all this without an office. We're still in the middle of our office remodel. That project's coming along nicely, but we look forward to having the nicest regional office in the state. Next slide. So of course, RAC member opportunities. Our big game biologists are doing spring deer classifications. I know that there's been some invites already, but if there's anyone else that wants to participate in those, our biologists are awesome people doing good work. So they'd love to have you along. We'll also be doing lambing surveys at Antelope Island for bighorn sheep, and the electrofishing and gillnet surveys with our fisheries crew are opportunities too. So let me know if any of those excite you. Probably spring deer classifications. Yeah, stay in the truck mostly. Okay, any questions? Okay, I'm gonna drink Justin.
Nah, I was timing you. I got another one in the truck. We can send some.
Thanks.
Hey, thank you, Ben, for going over
Yep.
all of that. I think it's great things that are going on. So if we don't have any other questions, we'll move right to our first agenda item, which is the wild turkey plan revision and recommendation. We have Heather Talley here. She's our Upland Game Coordinator. Heather, before we begin, is there anything that you'd like to clarify or discuss?
Are you hearing me okay?
Yes.
Excellent. Yeah, just to go over, in case anybody didn't see the outcome of the legislative session, I was just going to briefly touch on the way that the air guns shook out this year. So the legislation did pass a House bill to legalize air guns for the take of wild turkey in the fall season only, as well as for rabbits and hare. This bill states that pre-charged pneumatic air rifle means a rifle that fires a single projectile with a compressed air released from the chamber and built into the rifle and pressurized at a minimum of 2,000 pounds per square inch from an external high compression device or source, such as a hand pump, compressor, or scuba tank. And that part is just an informational item. So the part that we would like to bring to the RAC as far as our recommendation would just be those minimum requirements for the air rifles. So our recommendation is to, sorry, let me just get there really quick. To recommend that an air rifle will fire a single broadhead tipped bolt or arrow or pellet or slug that is 25 caliber or larger, weighs 18 grains or more, and is fired at a velocity to produce at least 30 foot-pounds of energy at the muzzle. And the reason for that, and a lot of you have heard this over the last few years that we've brought forth the air rifle recommendations, is just because that 25 caliber does increase the efficacy of lethality to a significant degree.
So if anyone watched last night's Central RAC meeting, I think they spoke a little bit, they probably went into a lot of depth, they went into a lot of depth about things that have already been passed through the legislature. So as far as the Pittman-Roberts, any of those things really, it's not something that's up for discussion tonight. That's all been approved. It'd just be us to approve the use of the 25 caliber for turkeys this time, correct? Not, or for all small game. This just be turkey.
For just fall wild turkey and then rabbit and hare. And
Okay.
yeah, the 25 caliber, 18 grains or more, 30 foot-pounds of energy at the muzzle. Those three requirements.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions for Heather concerning that or any other of the topics brought up with the turkey plan? Yeah, of course. Well, that's why we're here.
So, all right, on the air rifles, it just must be good to have friends in high places. But that's not for you. Where did you come up with the criteria for what size is sufficient? Why is that sufficient? Why is 25 caliber at that foot-pounds? How do we know that's enough?
Great question. And so this was heavily researched by Marty Bushman, who is an air gun enthusiast that's been with the DNR for a long time. And he kind of helped us come up with these minimum recommendations because we did reach out to other states, and it's completely different across the board. Everybody has different recommendations or different minimum requirements for their air rifle usage across different states. So also with speaking with Utah Air Guns and Mitch King with Air Gun Association, we arrived at this conclusion that these are very lethal. I know that there have been some studies that Justin with Utah Air Guns spoke to yesterday at the Central Region RAC regarding lethality. So it's been just a combination of a lot of research and a lot of speaking with airgun manufacturers and looking at what other states are doing. And so that's how we came up with those minimum recommendations.
So to piggyback on that a little bit, the fall hunt is to remove birds. It's to
Yes.
get them off private land primarily. I don't know how you counteract, and I don't know how big of a factor air rifles will even be, but turkeys aren't going to care. When their buddy standing next to them all of a sudden drops over for no apparent reason, that's not going to move them. Is there any thought or consideration given to that?
Yeah, and it's the same as, currently with rimfires that are allowed in the fall season, that we've heard kind of the same sort of sentiments about that. And the response to that is for a couple of reasons. For one, yes, we do want to haze the birds. We do want them to be removed from those, or to be scared off of those private properties and off of those damage areas. But we also want to remove offending birds. So the fall hunt really just encompasses two major objectives. One, alleviating the damage and removing those offending animals. And number two is to decrease those populations within those small targeted areas where they are a problem. And with that, with having small restricted boundaries, with having the season dates that we choose, we realize that they may not be scared as easily, but at the same time, if we are removing those offending animals, we are achieving those objectives. The secondary objective to this that comes up a lot is opportunity. So that's a great secondary objective, but that's why we changed this from a fall hunt to a fall management harvest, because this is just a management tool to rectify those damage situations and is not meant to necessarily create opportunity, but it is a wonderful secondary objective that we love to give the sportsman that opportunity to do that. So also with the fall hunts, it's very much not a traditional hunt. You're not calling in a bird like you would be in the spring. And because of that, sometimes they do need to be taken at further distances, and the single projectiles are efficient with that.
Right. And then two others, one really easy one. And this one, I just like it just to explain the logic behind, because I've had conversations and stuff, the logic behind allowing a person to obtain 3 tags.
Absolutely. So this was definitely a discussion with the Turkey Committee, and a big thank you to everybody that served on that as well. So, and then we arrived to our same recommendation that we'd put forward last year during this RAC session. And the reason for that, there's a couple of different reasons. One is it's a lot easier for a landowner to deal with fewer people taking care of the problem on their property. And we want to be able to be flexible and give them that latitude. One of the issues that we ran into last year was that fall permits actually the vouchers also count towards your fall permit allocation. And we hadn't realized that. I had mistakenly not realized that in the rule when we had passed those recommendations to go down to 1 permit. So some landowners in some situations couldn't find people that they knew or family members that they knew to fill any vouchers because those people already went and purchased a fall permit. So this just gives more flexibility to allow them to have people they know and trust on their private land, which we realize if people are running cattle or sheep or have equipment, that is something that we need to address. One of the other things that we did realize with this is the data. So last year, of course, we just issued the 1 permit, so we don't have this data for last year. But for 2021, back through 2018, when we first started issuing 3 permits per person, we can see in this data that people that purchased 1 permit either didn't hunt or didn't kill a bird in 2021, 75% of those people with 1 permit didn't hunt or didn't kill a bird. In 2020, that number was 72%. In 2019, that was 65%, and 62% in 2018. So people are more apt to go out hunting if they have more permits. And because this fall management harvest is designed to target those nuisance or depredation birds, we want to make sure that people are actually getting out there, and even if they're not harvesting, that they're applying that hunter pressure, like you're saying, to get them moving. But with people that were issued 3 permits, only 19% in 2018 did not get birds or did not hunt. 17% in 2019, up to 39% in 2020, which is still a smaller percentage than 57% with 2 permits or 72% with 1 permit. And in 2021, that was a 50% of that had 3 permits, didn't hunt or didn't get a bird, but 56% with 2 permits didn't hunt or didn't get a bird, and in 75% with 1 permit. So the data has shown us that people are more apt to go afield if they do have those more permits, and that it is easier for landowners to get their issues rectified. Sorry, that was a really long answer.
That's good. So, and the last thing, only if you have anything you want to add, you guys just completed this turkey plan. What was the biggest takeaway? What was the biggest victory, do you think?
Sure. Let me just open up that presentation really fast, just because I had a couple of different main points in that I would like to share. One thing was the feeding policy, definitely. We're excited about the implementation of that. That helps us know when to feed, when not to feed, sets criteria for when we know that populations may be in trouble and may need that emergency feeding before it's too late. Also gives us directive to not feed in areas of avian influenza or CWD concerns, so we're not spreading disease, as it's much easier to introduce birds into an area later rather than spreading that disease into some areas where maybe they didn't need to be, where maybe it didn't exist before. Also, a crash response plan was created, and this is also one of those things where it's helping us identify a problem before it gets to the point of past what we can do something about it. And also these limited entry boundary revisions, we just had heard from the public sentiment a couple of years ago that they weren't always really clear on where the limited entry boundaries were. So we moved that back to highways and roads rather than county lines. So that's something as well to vote on tonight. And then although the release sites are not necessarily a part of the plan, it's a 6-year plan, but because the release sites are due for revision every 5 years, it just so happened that this expiration of release sites coincided with our creation of the plan. So we did also speak with the committee about that and did send this out for RDCC comment, for BLM and Forest Service comment as well. So those are kind of our big takeaways.
See that Jamie had a question as well.
I have a couple. So you talked in both the management plan, like in the revisions about nuisance and depredation by turkeys. Can you explain what that is? I understand like poultry farms, there could be kind of a risk of viruses and other things that are spread, but what else do turkeys do to be nuisance and cause depredation?
They do everything. So what we mean by that is, number one, yeah, of course they can damage crops. They can be damaging landowners' fields if they've just planted something, maybe digging up seed. They're also beneficial in a lot of ways to help control insects. But it's all dependent on that time of year. Another thing with that is, a lot of oat hay stacks, bales, they end up getting into and thrashing around, eating, defecating on. So that can also be an issue for depredation. They like to get into mangers where cattle are trying to eat and can be very aggressive towards cattle and prohibit them from eating. So there's a lot of different ways that they can cause material damage or crop damage. And then also with nuisance, just being in town, once they don't have that initial or that innate fear of humans anymore, they can be really aggressive and cause issues for traffic. So those are kind of a few of them. I don't know if you have specific questions about the northern region depredation or nuisance, Jim can respond to that.
Really, I was just curious. It didn't really say in the management plan or anywhere, and I just hadn't experienced that. So yeah. You talked about translocating a lot of these turkeys. And I guess I have a couple of questions about that. Like, why would these areas not have as many turkeys on them? Like, are they like subpar habitat? And are there other species on those that could be negatively impacted where turkeys are being translocated?
So as far as the release sites, we look for anywhere that will have suitable habitat that is going to sustain turkeys. If they haven't moved into those drainages, it may just be a result of they've never been there since we reestablished turkeys in the 80s. It could just be that they were there and then a very small flock size may have extirpated and for some reason, maybe a harsh winter or something like that. And so it's not that they were ever, it's not that these release sites are in places where it wasn't, great habitat. It may have not been great habitat in the past, and now we've done some habitat projects and the habitat is more suitable now. But it's not a situation where we're suddenly taking turkeys to areas where the habitat wouldn't sustain.
And what about other wildlife? Are there other wildlife that would be competing with them or that they would be competing with?
Sure, that's all part of when our biologists put together these release sites, they look at all of that. So everything's pretty much already ground truth as far as, hey, this would be a suitable habitat. It would be not an issue for other native species, and it would also not create depredation or nuisance areas or nuisance situations. That's kind of what we're looking to make sure of before establishing those sites.
I just have one more question. What is the survival rate of translocated turkeys?
It depends. We've done some GPS transmitter work, and some live longer than others. The average survival rate of turkeys is just a few years. So we're trying to look for that, if we can get them established and get some poult production, then we haven't gone into, capturing poults and putting transmitters on them. So we don't have the answer for how much recruitment has necessarily resulted from the translocations, but we definitely have seen expansions of turkeys in places where we've put them where they were not in the past. So we know that there's definitely a level of success.
I guess my last thing is just more of a comment. In going through the management plan, it talked about like wildlife watching and that there wasn't really data and there was really no information. And I would love, love, love to see that expanded because, turkeys are big, they're charismatic. You don't have to have binoculars to see them. So that's more of a comment of, I would love to see that expanded in the future.
That's a really great comment, and especially because we already have so many great watching events like for sandhill cranes and for other species. So definitely something we could work towards with our outreach section. Thank you for that.
Thank you so much for what you do.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions for members of the RAC? Not seeing any, we'll turn some time over to the public. Is there any questions from members of the public for Heather? Okay, I'll turn the time over to Ben to go over the public feedback.
Thank you. We had 3 people respond to this question. 2 strongly disagreed and 1 strongly agreed, or a weighted average of 2.33. There were no additional comments with their votes.
That will turn to public comment. We have a few cards we have for this agenda item. 2. We have 2. We'll first hear from Cody Reese representing Youth Hunters Voice. Someone representing a group will have 5 minutes, and representing yourself will have 3. Following Cody, we'll then have Angie Wanacott, who is here representing SFW.
You guys hear me?
Might need to turn.
Right into that microphone. You almost have to eat it.
Okay, eating the mic. You guys hear me now? Cody Reese here, sporting Youth Hunters Voice. We emailed some comments to all of you. I hope you guys got them, maybe checked them out. On this turkey thing, we shot for the moon, and I've had the opportunity to talk to Heather on the phone and in person several occasions, and we realized that was probably too much. She gave some data, some info on the breeding and the brooding, and the year-round hunting thing is probably not a possibility. We are still going to have a pretty big ask, and we want you to consider it. Last night we went to the Central. We asked for unlimited tags on the limited entry for youth. where the youth really only represent 11% of the license holders in the state. That was a big ask also. A couple of guys were in support of that, a couple weren't. Right now, the rule is 15%. Youth actually represent a bigger number than 15% on the turkey limited entry draw because it's something that they can obtain and they look forward to that. I did talk with Heather about, she had some, and thank you very much for that, but she has some studies that show that the youth really do need more than just a single event, and it's year after year after year of multiple events, multiple tags in their pocket, multiple reasons. And we realize that there's opportunity there for the youth with some of the fall hunts, maybe some of the later spring hunts that are unlimited, but they're not the limited entry hunts. We reserve half of our limited entry big game tags for the highest point holders. Okay, we're giving 15% to our youth. I feel like that's unfair. I think that that's not even reasonable. So I know that more than 15% actually get the tags because they do plug out the 15 and then they send them into the random draw and they do get a few more. But maybe we could even go to 50% or more for the youth. Like, let's get the youth the tag in their pocket for a limited entry hunt. Like, they deserve it. The fall hunt management plan, I've heard this thrown around a couple of times, but maybe try to make some kind, and I don't know, you guys might have to brainstorm on this. I'm not in the knowledge of this, but a mentorship program of some kind that kids could get their hands on some of these tags and help some of the landowners target the offender birds. I mean, it would be something where they could get more days in the field, have more opportunity, have good experiences, be successful. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Cody. We'll have Angie, and then we also received another card. We'll have Chuck Carpenter up next.
Short. Hi, I'm Angie Wanacott, and I'm representing SFW. I was actually one of the committee members on the turkey plan, and there was a lot of information and a lot of discussion. So I support that, and then SFW supports the recommendation as well. So thanks.
Thank you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Chuck Carpenter. I'm actually the district biologist for National Wild Turkey Federation, and that's who I'm representing today. Like Angie, I was also part of the Turkey Plan Committee, and we totally support it. We're real happy with it. I did want to kind of touch on a couple things that got brought up in the central and kind of tonight. The 3 tag deal in the fall season. I think people hear the 3 tags and they're like, you know, that's a lot per person. But it really was brought up in that plan that these landowners, they didn't want to allow 3 times more people on their property to deal with the turkey nuisance issue, whether that be real or perceived. The division does have to do something about it. And really at this point, we're trying to build that social tolerance, and in turn that just builds the social carrying capacity of turkeys, because it really is kind of an issue. Like, we're almost capped out on that front. So if we can help landowners out with bringing that down, feel like their needs are met, I think that'll be a net, bonus to turkeys in general. And really with that, like Heather talked about 3 tags, you actually get people more involved in hunting, like they're actually going out more, putting more pressure on those fall birds. But a thing that I think needs to be mentioned is over the last couple of years, the average is like 78% harvest on the first tag, 16 on the second, and 6 on the third. Like, those other 2 tags aren't even doing much. So I think people hear that 3 when the third tag is really like a non-talking point. 6%, it's not a big deal. So I think that's something that also should be kind of looked at when addressing that. But yeah, that's it. We support everything, and thanks.
Thank you. I wanted to just highlight more than anything, just recognize something. So talking with people throughout preparing for this meeting, and I just wanted to I don't know, recognize and congratulate or say thank you. So many people that I spoke with mentioned, I talked with Heather, I spoke with Heather. That's a good thing. You know, I hope people recognize that that division employees are there to listen and to hear, and it really helps, clean up and answer a lot of questions. So I just want to say thank you for keeping yourself available. You sent an email to all of us that said, please reach out with any questions, but also not just RAC members, but public and everyone else. I just wanted to recognize that. If your boss is watching, saying you're doing a great job with that. So thank you for doing that, because it really does help. So thank you.
And thank you so much for spreading the word, because it helps us a ton to have that information that people want ahead of time, so we can gather all that data and present what it is that you're looking for. So thank you.
Yeah. All right. So with that, we'll go with some comments from members of the RAC. Kevin?
I've always been a strong believer in if the kids go hunting, dad goes with them. That's the way my youth was. I got my dad involved in hunting again because I wanted to go. So I really sympathize with this youth number of permits. And I don't think, I mean, when I think about it in my mind, if we go to 50%, how many adults won't put in? I don't know where that line is, but I would agree, at least off the cuff, that 15% should be increased for youth permits.
Do you mind if I offer some numbers?
You bet.
Great. So I just wanted to let you know that, yeah, the 15% is the cap for, or is the minimum amount that we want to allow for youth to apply for. But then all the youth that apply up and beyond the 15% still draw out as well. So have the same odds as anybody else would. So for these last units for the limited entry turkey hunt, we had the percent of youth that applied ranged between 16%, 14%, in some 18%, 21%. And the percentage of youth that drew out ranged anywhere from 18% is the lowest, a lot of 20 and 21%, 25%, 33%, with an average of 20% of youth getting that. So we're already above that minimum, definitely. For the general season youth hunt, somebody did pull some numbers today for me. And in 2019, in the general season, we had 1,874 youth and over 8,000 adults participate. In 2020, 2,734 youth and 9,713 youth, or adults, excuse me. 2021, 2,302 youth and almost 9,500 adults. And in 2022, we had just over 2,100 youth and a little over 8,200 adults. So we are getting, I do feel like we're effectively reaching those youth. And just keeping in mind that if they do draw out for limited entry, they do get to hunt that unit for the limited entry hunt. Then they can hunt statewide for the 3-day youth hunt if they haven't harvested. And if they still haven't harvested, they get the whole month of May statewide as well. And Cody brought up a good point with just talking about the research of R3, because everybody wants to take youth out and get them interested and involved in hunting. And like you said, a lot of times the youth are the ones that get the parents involved. But if for a lot of parents that don't hunt or never have hunted, it's so daunting to them that just dropping off their kid, like he alluded to earlier, for a one-day event just isn't enough to actually produce retention. So that's why these R3 studies that have been done have shown that really targeting younger generations, single parents that have never hunted or, maybe don't have as much of that opportunity to get out, and having them be mentored, or college students that grow a love for hunting and then they teach that to their kids. Those are really the demographics that we're seeing that actually move into that retention sector of the R3. So that's, and having said that, we are very interested in other mentorship opportunities. And we are always looking at new ways that we can reach out to those demographics and to actually increase our R3 efforts.
Thank you, Heather. That was some great information. Thanks.
So am I understanding correctly that you would say it's not necessary to make unlimited youth limited entry tags available?
I think that there could be some negative biological implications if we just went unlimited, and it would likely deter some of people from putting in for limited entry. So right now, they do have to still take the extra step to put in for a draw. And we just don't know what that would look like if it's unlimited for all youth that just have a hunting or combo license. We don't know how taking away that first step might impact the youth hunters. We might see a lot more people out there maybe pushing them around and kind of just making that limited entry hunt no longer limited entry, really kind of nullifying that with more youth out there. Or on the flip side, there may not be more youth that have mentors to take them, and it may not make a difference, but there's no way for us to know that. And it is just something that people really look forward to, that quality hunt, and that biologically, without knowing how for sure how that would impact them, that's why we didn't change our recommendation.
But at the same time, that was 15% was the minimum. There is room, and the division could support a possible having that number go up higher, I guess.
I guess what I was thinking about going through these numbers is just to illustrate, right now the average for statewide for limited entry is already above and beyond the 15%. So we're already getting 20% of youth out there. And one of the other concerns from an R3 perspective would just be if we're taking more permits away from the adults that are taking their youth hunting and they're not as interested, that could also possibly have some negative effects, but we just don't, we haven't done this before, so we don't have anything concrete. But my recommendation with this suggestion would be to target mentorship opportunities for the species that don't have draws. So we've got a lot of, forest grouse, pheasant, chukar, quail, rabbit. We have a lot of species that don't require a draw out. So we could always look to get youth involved that way.
And I'll even chime in on this one. We have a general season hunt after. Anybody can go buy a license or a tag.
I think the question would be the quality of the hunt and the success rate, but I do agree with that. And I would hope that we're getting the youth out. I mean, if it number were to go up higher, and I mean, I put in for that, and I put my kids in for that, but if my kids, I want them to draw over me every time anyway.
Sure.
But anyway, it's a good discussion to think about. Any other comments from members? I'd just get to consider all the comments and what we've heard, and I'd entertain a motion.
I'd make the motion that we accept the proposal as presented.
We have a motion by Randy to accept as presented,
I'll second.
and a second by Ryan. Any discussion on the motion? All right, seeing none. Let me see one of these so I can call the rolls. I'm going to call for a vote. We'll begin with Ryan Brown,
Yes.
Brad Buchanan,
Yes.
Jamie Butler,
Yes.
Paul Chase,
Yes.
David Earl.
Yes.
Junior's not here. Randy Hutchinson,
Yes.
Emily,
Yes.
Matt,
Yes.
Mike,
Yes.
Kevin,
Yes.
Darren,
Yes.
and Nikki.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. We'll now move to agenda item number 6, the Upland game recommendations. We also still have Heather still here. Heather, is there any comments or anything that you'd like to add to this part of the?
Just again, the air guns for rabbit and hare. So we already covered that, but that's the only really big new change.
Okay, does anyone have any questions for Heather on this item?
I'd like to, this is my thing, but the recommendations are pretty much in line with what they always have been. There's really no big changes here. I would throw out, and I throw it out every time, I really think the checker hunt needs to be moved back. We open it way too early. The birds are too young, they're not flyers, and they're all on water sources. So throw it now, keep throwing it out every year.
We do appreciate it, and we are in the midst of a BYU checker study right now. So if we can get you out there as well, that would be great, just to have that opportunity.
They actually caught the first spring checker ever and put a radio on them. So that would be cool to find
Thanks
out.
to Avery's research, he found a sweet YouTube video of how to do it. So
You can find anything on YouTube, how to catch it. Okay, awesome. All right.
I got
Uh-huh.
I get hammered by a bunch of the guys I hunt with on the sandhill crane. And Heather and I talked, and I had a chance to talk to several of you about it. In 2020, the season in Box Elder was extended to just be really nice. And so some of the feeling of the guys that I hunt with is it targets the Box Elder hunt, and we get more applicants. And we did in 2020. But I just want, for the record, that we've looked into it. Those numbers came down. They're really leveled off after that 2020 season. And success rate went right back to being about what it was before. Sandhill crane permits were increased. And so it's really kind of solved its own. But in the future, if there is some opportunity for the division to look at longer season dates in some of the other units to maybe take some of that pressure off, because there is a little bit of a disparity, but not much. But I appreciate being able to talk to you guys and vet through that.
definitely, thanks so much for reaching out. And I know Jason will be attending the Flyway meeting in August and can definitely bring that up.
Any other questions before we turn the time over to the public? Do we have any questions for anyone? Questions from the public? Yep.
One question. So probably Heather, you can answer this, but on the sharp-tailed grouse, I looked the data up myself, and it does say 15% for the youth, 696 permits issued last year. 56 youth applied and only 40 drew. Can you explain what happened there?
Let me pull that up just 1 second.
Okay.
Thank you. So I have a total statewide applications of 362 from youth, and that 75 youth drew. And our total number that drew, including adults, was 470. Because we do have just, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm on Sandhill Crane, and I really apologize. As you saw from last night's RAC, I say the wrong thing a lot.
I thought I was
So-
really good read.
No, sorry, I was thinking Sandhill Crane in my mind. So for sharp-tailed grouse, yeah, the total youth applications was 66, and the total youth that drew was 40. And the total that drew was 288. So we did have, but we show a total throughout both of the units that there was a percentage of youth that applied. We had 9%, but then like average throughout the state, but then a 15% total that went to youth. Probably on the second draw after all the youth that applied the first time. So let me see if we can get Lindy on to help clarify
Thank you.
that data. No problem.
Do we have any other questions? All right. Seeing none, we'll turn the time over to Ben to go over the public feedback.
Okay, like the last item, we had 3 people respond. 2 were strongly disagreed. And 1 was neither in agreement or disagreement for a weighted average of 1.67. And none of those 3 respondents provided any additional comments.
For anyone listening, if you're going to disagree, it really helps us know the reason why so that we can help address your concerns. So, okay. With that, we have 1 comment card on this item. And again, it's Cody Reese from Youth Hunter's Voice.
Cody Reese, Youth Hunter's Voice. Again, same thing, 15% here, guys. I know that we're just saying youth have opportunity, but we really need, like last year, and I know it was a small number, 16 youth or so didn't draw the tag they wanted, but we can be better than that, just on the sharp-tailed grouse. That's all.
Thank you. All right, I'll now turn the time over to the RAC for any comments or discussion on this item. Jamie.
I just want to echo what you said, that like I go through those public comments and I see when people disagree or strongly disagree or agree, but it helps me so much to understand why. So I just want to echo, please put comments so that I, in my naive state, can understand why you disagree or don't disagree.
You have any other comments? If not, again, I ask you to consider what we've heard, and I'd entertain a motion on this agenda item.
Make the motion, we approve as presented.
I'll second.
Motion by Brad to approve as presented and a second by Ryan. Any discussion on this before we call a vote? All right. I'll call for a vote. Ryan Brown,
Yes.
Brad Buchanan,
Yes.
Jamie Butler,
Yes.
Paul Chase,
Yes.
David Earl,
Yes.
Randy Hutchinson,
Yes.
Emily,
Yes.
Matt,
Yes.
Mike,
Yes.
Kevin,
Yes.
Darren,
Yes.
and Nikki.
Yes.
And Casey Snyder is unable to log his vote, but asked that he is a yes on this. He's able to hear, but can't speak.
All right, that's perfect. Anyway, no, sorry. No. Sorry, Casey. I actually begged him to please join, so, anyway. All right, we'll now go to our next agenda item. Agenda item number 7, the waterfowl rule and swan hunt recommendation. I can't repeat what he just texted. All right. So we have here today, we have Jason actually is going to be here to answer any questions. Is there anything that you'd like to address before?
I would. First of all, I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I'm the new migratory game bird coordinator. They did pluck me out of the marshes of the Great Salt Lake, where I've been working for the last 18 years. This is my first week on the job here, though. And I want to thank Heather for doing a great job running this program before I got here. So I just want to stress that the recommendation that the division came to really was because we want to maximize that opportunity that hunters were given in 2019 when we expanded the hunt boundaries, to include an additional 10,000 acres of property. And I know most of you probably got a chance to watch the Central Region RAC last night. And if you didn't, they kind of landed on recommending that the state figure out a way to take possession of the trumpeter swans, but not make the take of the swan illegal. And we've had some meetings today and been reviewing our code and rules, and the state feels like we could make that happen. We could take possession of the bird but make the take of the bird not illegal. And that's something the Division of Wildlife could live with. And I did want to make one correction that was in the presentation video. It was stated that we're seeing 100,000 trumpeter swans, and that was an honest mistake. We're not seeing 100,000 more trumpeter swans. Biologists are noticing like 2,000 to 3,000 trumpeters. On average, we see like around 50,000 tundra swans maximum on a yearly basis. And so that's just the correction I want to make. And any questions?
Can I just, for those who didn't have an opportunity, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'll try to mention what the motion was or what passed with the Central RAC. They asked that everyone was concerned about there being the citation, and that from accidental take of these animals, didn't want to see people punished. And so it was brought up, find a way that they could try to help address targeting of these, but also not criminalize someone for an honest accident. And so they thought there was a motion made that as the swans were checked in, if it was a trumpeter, that trumpeter swan would be confiscated and that they would lose their permit. But that would be the end. And two things, it would not criminalize someone, but it would also hopefully deter some targeting that believes to take place. And so that was the motion. And I don't remember if it passed unanimously, but it was favored highly. So that's one of the things that was addressed there. So anyway, so with that, I'll turn the time over to RAC for some
I've got a question.
questions. That's where we're at. We'll start with Kevin.
So if you decriminalize the taking of a trumpeter, but there's a trumpeter killed, do we still have a quota that once we hit, we have to stop the swan hunt?
Yeah, we're still going to have a quota.
So for clarification, there's mandatory check-in, right, on the swans?
Yeah, the state there's a mandatory check-in. You have 72 hours to check in your swan. It's part of an agreement the state has agreed with Fish and Wildlife for the mandatory 72-hour check-in period.
Would you know, and I know this is off the cuff, is it 100%? 100% of people check in.
Do 100%? I mean, we would have to guess.
Yeah, sure.
Estimate,
But
I mean, I'm guessing no, but
I wouldn't think so either. I was just curious what the percentage might be.
It's about 90.
90%. That's better than I was thinking. So that was my curiosity. Thank you.
Your first week and you get this.
It's cool because I'm a duck biologist from the Great Salt Lake, so it's cool.
so no, and this is one that I've agonized over this one. I actually went up, we drove around with some very informed people. I hit the old boundary, the new boundaries, looked at everything. And this one frustrates me because I melted down last year when we closed the season early. I know the weather ended up closing it as well because things froze up last year, but that was a one-off. And my first initial reaction last year was I was screaming like, hey, let's just make it illegal. Yeah, that's tough. I don't know what the Attorney General's office was saying on that confiscating. But what are your thoughts? We can't stop people from targeting. We can't stop accidents because accidents will happen on this type of a hunt. What impact, if any, do you think there would be from just moving it back to the old boundary?
Well, Blair and I have a couple slides if we can put them up. I mean, I feel like from looking at the data, prior to 2019, around 34% of swans were taken at the Bear River Refuge. And now from 2019 to 2022, 32% of all swans were taken at public shooting grounds. So, okay, Blair's got that number up right there. So my first thought is like, we're just going to move the problem from public shooting grounds back over to the Bear River Refuge. And you're obviously really familiar with those properties. You know that they're contiguous properties. And as a crow flies, Unit 1A of the refuge is 4 miles from public shooting grounds. And we know there's a lot more trumpeter swans around. So I think my feeling is if we go back to the original boundary, we might still end up closing the season early because we're just going to take the problem from public over to the Bear River Refuge. I mean, the hunters are going to have to go back to the refuge to shoot their swans, and there's a chance they're going to shoot as many trumpeter swans.
Okay. And I just didn't know because I know the habitat seems to be better for the trumpeters in those areas that we opened up. And maybe I'm wrong on that. Correct me if I'm wrong on that.
Well, Blair and I were just talking about this. I mean, the refuge had gone dry last summer, which means they didn't grow any submergent vegetation. And so I'm sure all the swans were hammering public shooting grounds because they had food to eat. This year, the refuge is inundated with water, so it's going to be a different scenario. So, I mean, a lot of that stuff we can't predict, I guess, because it's driven by food availability.
Okay. All right. And then I'll just throw out, and you don't need to respond on this. A lot of the comments, I was really surprised just saying like, well, we can dictate to the Fed what's happening on this. The federal government dictates how many birds can be taken. People just need to realize that and understand that. And so whatever change, I don't think there's a good solution to this. That all the solutions suck. They do, but we have we have a handful of years where people are going to lose opportunities to hunt. And that's my frustrated part.
If I could comment, I mean, the division is committed to keep working on this feather analysis so we can kind of determine if the swans are part of this Yellowstone population of sensitive swans, or if they're part of the Rocky Mountain population of swans. And if we can get enough data, we can take to the Fish and Wildlife over the next few years. We want to keep working with them to see if we can do away with the quota, but we have to have the evidence to bring to them. So, and the preliminary results are showing that, correct me if I'm wrong, Blair, but the preliminary results are showing from the feathers we tested that they're from the Rocky Mountain population of swans. So,
Is that being passed on? Is it passed on on a yearly basis? What's the communication like between the division and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife?
well, I'm going to be the flyway representative, and we're having feathers tested. So we're trying to collect data that we can bring to them. And they're a big machine that wants data. They're a data-driven machine. So I'll meet with them twice a year, and we just try to do the best we can for Utah, and we work within those federal regulations. So if Utah wants to make a change, I mean, obviously we have to have some evidence to bring to them. And for this situation, we're going to need evidence that shows that we're not taking birds from the Yellowstone population of trumpeter swans.
Okay, awesome, thank you.
I'm looking, one second. So I'm looking at these percentages, and I'm going to ask if you'll commit to give 100% effort to pushing this through the Fed. I'd like to see that the division, that our waterfowl section do all that they can, and I think that you would please give all the effort you can to try and get that data in so that we can get this moving. I feel like we're behind. I think we've had 3 years that this is coming up. As a RAC, we have asked, and again, I don't pretend to know all the ins and outs, but I'm going to just give it even a little more effort than whatever's been given, because I think it's that urgent. We have a lot of questions coming, so I'm going to start. Casey found his voice, so I'm going to have Casey has got a question for you. After Casey, we'll then go to Jamie, and then we will go to Nikki.
Can you hear me over there?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry to disappoint you and start talking and not remain silent and all that crap. So whatever. Hey, so the question I have for the division is on the confiscation piece, what's the base assumption in making that rule? Is the base assumption that individuals are targeting trumpeters, and do you have any data to coordinate that or collaborate that?
The division's recommendation is all about keeping opportunity open for the public at public shooting grounds. I don't think we don't know how many people are targeting and how many people are just having an honest mistake. The targeting is obvious from social media. And, we don't have any numbers on who is making an honest mistake or who is targeting, but the recommendation is all about maintaining that opportunity for the public. And really,
well, no,
short.
Go ahead. Sorry.
That's it.
Okay. So, but I kind of want to dive into that a little bit more. If I get where you're coming from, right? Nobody likes the season shut early, especially if most of those swans, at least historically, have come a little later. They start coming in November and things get early. So if you don't get out, you kind of feel frustrated. But if you're talking about preserving opportunity, I want to know why confiscation preserves opportunity rather than moving the boundary, which seems to be consistent with when the problem started.
So I think we feel like if we can take the swan, then that takes away the incentive for people to treat it as a trophy. And that's really the important part for me. The important part for me isn't like penalizing somebody legally. I think the important part would be taking away the trophy, because we really don't want trumpeter swans taken. We don't want them seen as a trophy. We're trying to encourage people not to harvest them. So I mean, the crux of this for me is to be able to take the swan. And again, we kind of feel like if we just revert to the original boundary that we might not solve the problem just because there's more trumpeter swans, and we feel like we just might move that problem over to the refuge. So if that answers your question, Casey.
Well, I get what you're trying to do, but what data do you have to show that targeting is driving this, right? So the reason I'm asking this is I think we're making some pretty broad assumptions. I think targeting has always existed, right? The rule has been pretty consistent through time, and there's always been the jerks that break the rules and kill the birds and everything else like that. But if we're gonna, these birds are hard to identify, anyone that's hunted them, when you have a tundra and a trumpeter next to each other, it's pretty easy, right? One's a lot bigger, everything else. You get a juvenile, like there's mistakes happen. And I think the Fish and Wildlife Service allowing us to take so many birds is, at least even from a federal side, an acknowledgement that in the hunt, it's hard to make an identification on the fly without any sort of context. And so I'm just worried that we're making broad assumptions that this is all just a targeting problem and that this is going to fix it. I understand what you're saying, population data, and I think what Justin said, ultimately we've got to get information to fix this problem. But I would like a more measured approach, maybe creeping back in, moving, maybe adjusting public shooting grounds out initially, because that's where most of those birds are getting taken, rather than birds are going to die. And if we confiscate, we're just wasting, and we're basing that waste on assumptions that we don't have data to prove. And so really my concern with the recommendation is birds are still going to die. We'll still hit the quota, and now they'll just be wasted and thrown away. Whereas if we maybe try and move the boundary, take that population out, again, that's an assumption as much as this targeting assumption. At least birds that are taken aren't just going to be thrown away and left to waste. So that's just kind of my concern with the issue. But I understand the dance here, so appreciate what you're trying to do.
Thanks, Casey. And I think we did talk today about putting, like, if any birds were taken by the state, we could put them on a list for like a meat donation. So we had that discussion earlier today.
Can I add something to that?
Yeah.
So just speaking from the regional standpoint, most of the birds that are harvested come into the regional office for their check and measurements. In my experience, and this is just anecdotal data, Casey, but it's pretty easy to connect when we're going to see a bird come into the office, because we see the hero post on social media, and then our phones all start to blow up because, hey, some guy harvested another trumpeter out at public or wherever else, and then give them a day or two, and then you see that same person in the office. And so anecdotally, we can say a good chunk of the 20 birds that are harvested are targeted birds. Not all of them, but a good proportion of them. So I don't think we've ever kept track of how many for each category, but we just know from experience that a good amount of them are targeted birds, and that targeting, we think the assumption is that if we take possession of the bird, that's going to de-incentivize the targeting and hopefully extend the period by which tundra hunters can continue to hunt.
Thanks, Ben.
Okay, Jamie.
Hey, help me understand this. I mean, like really on the ground, because I'm not sitting behind a gun. I'm like looking from binoculars and scopes and not trying to like shoot something moving. Like really, and this is a question for the RAC and for Jason, although I think Jason should be like on the hot seat a little bit. I know him and maybe he deserves to be in the hot seat a little bit, but really, how hard are they to distinguish when you're hunting? How hard is it to distinguish a tundra from a trumpeter?
That's an open question.
Is that for the RAC first or for Jason first?
That's for you.
Okay, so I do hunt waterfowl, and I had some really ethical teachers that taught me how to hunt waterfowl. And so for us, a lot of the fun is to go out and ID the birds before we take them. And, not everybody has had that experience in their life or has that kind of knowledge base, but you can identify the two birds on vocalization and on size. Now, granted, you probably need to have good light and some good knowledge and have done your homework, and also be patient and know when you should and shouldn't take a bird, which is, for me, part of waterfowl hunting. I was taught it's not part of, I've worked in the field a long time. It's not part of waterfowl hunting for a lot of our, waterfowlers out there, but it's really how it has to be done if we expect people to distinguish between the two species. But we ask people to distinguish between redheads and canvasbacks and hen mallards and drake mallards and scaup or ringneck ducks, things like that. So
Do you think, sorry, Jamie, do you also think that this confiscating the birds may also make everyone think a little more, not just a mistake, but maybe take more time to identify the bird? So we're not just going after the targeting people, but it might be another person think twice before pulling that trigger, knowing that they may not get to keep the bird.
Yeah, I think it's a good incentive. To me, when I started talking about this issue right off the bat, it was the taking of the bird seems to me to be like the crux of this, because we know they're being treated like trophies. The penalty part, it's not. I'm not in law enforcement, but it's not in my brain. It's like, how can we how can we encourage people not to harvest a trumpeter swan, or to take a little more time and be selective, and, confiscating or taking possession of the bird, I think is a good incentive. So.
Nikki.
Boy. Okay, so you mentioned that you are doing feather samples. Are you doing stable isotope testing? Is that how you're determining the population? Okay. Love stable isotope testing.
Well, we're sending it off to a lab. So.
Well, the concept of it.
Yes.
Can you rephrase the population? Because I had written down on my notes when I was reviewing that the 100,000 plus increase in trumpeter swans, which was, maybe it was tundra swans, and tundra swans. What are the actual populations in the state? You mentioned 40 to 50,000.
So we've been monitoring tundra swans for years and years. That was part of the lawsuit that went back to the early 2000s. We agreed to monitor. The monitoring portion, we had done it over such a long-term period, and the numbers didn't change, that we quit flying those surveys a few years ago. So that was like a long-term weekly monitoring that would start in October and go through December, and we would peak in November around 50,000 tundra swans. And you wouldn't see a lot of trumpeters, and we don't have official trumpeter swan surveys, but a lot of us live up in the Corinna area or hunt up in the Corinna area, or some of the landowners or people we know, and people are seeing 3,000 and 4,000 trumpeter swans, and people are seeing them when they're out hunting. But it was a mistake in this presentation to say 100,000 trumpeters, or not 100,000 trumpeters here.
Okay.
So.
I thought so. I just, for clarification, as of curiosity. And then I had a similar thought to Jamie from someone who just birds and doesn't hunt. I can tell the difference between the two. And I feel like the equipment that hunters use, from what I've seen from my family that hunts, are much better than my binoculars. So I'm wondering if there's like a baseline requirement for training, like with hunter education. Could we spend more effort discerning between species where there is some closeness, but maybe enough of a difference that it's obvious? Is that?
So we have in our swan orientation course, we have a training video. And like I said, I'm new to the program, so I don't know if we need to revamp our video. Most hunters don't use any binoculars when the bird is coming in, because they're getting ready to shoot. But, they'll have binoculars from afar. But so we have an orientation video that, shows you the difference and has the vocalizations. And of course, our guidebook has photographs of all the important waterfowl species.
Okay, great. And then I just had a random thought. I agree that like confiscating versus penalizing is a better option. But I also recognize that there's a pain point when you talk about just wasting a bird. If it's just, I don't know what you do with it when you confiscate it. If it's, I don't know. But I wonder if maybe donating it to universities or museums for taxidermy so it can be used as a teaching tool, there might be some value in that instead of just wasting a bird. But again, I don't know what you all do, so.
That's an option. And again, we did have a discussion today. We do have a meat donation list. So, and some birds that we've taken possession of that people shouldn't have, like great blue herons or whatnot, we've had taxidermy for educational purposes too, so.
I have another question from Jamie, and then we'll go to Brad.
Hey, when folks hunt swans, what do they do with them? You said there's a meat list and people taxidermy them. What do people do with swans when they hunt them?
Well, they should be eating them. So, yeah, for sure, Jamie, they definitely should eat them if they take them. So, but most of them, a lot of people are going to have their swan taxidermy too. I mean, I haven't put in for swan because I'm not super interested. I'm more interested in just ducks and geese and stuff like that. But a lot of folks might just put in for one swan and get it taxidermied. But
and can I ask you another question about, these birds have feathers, they fly, they migrate. Like, is there a reason, that we have more trumpeters here? I mean, we've kind of talked about Utah, but what about like along the flyway and kind of what's their status? Are they coming to Utah because there's no other places for them to go? Are our eggs in one basket, do you suppose?
I mean, we're not sure the ins and outs of why we're seeing an increase of trumpeters in the state. I mean, we see a lot of the changes in waterfowl populations, and it's hard to pin down why we see changes. I mean, in migration patterns, it's a lot of us. I mean, we were just having a discussion before this meeting about why we're seeing more trumpeters or why we're seeing less mallards. When we're not 100% sure why we see some of these changes. So, but it's probably habitat and weather and food driven, obviously. So,
Brad.
Just one point of clarification, the slide you just had there that Blair showed, that was total swan take, not trumpeter take, correct?
yeah, that was total swan take. If I'm thinking of the right slide you had up there.
Yeah, it showed the shift from 32% on the big
Yeah, there
river
was,
up to
yeah,
public.
before 2019, 30, I think like in 2018, 32 or 34% of harvest was at the refuge. That was the high amount. And then and then from 2019 to 2022, the average was like 32% of birds taken. All swans, tundra and trumpeters was about 32% of public.
You
And
don't
then
have a
again, those
slide
properties
showing
are,
the percentage shift of trumpeter take.
so
Do you?
that was just total swan take.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, this one right there.
Yeah.
So I have another question. It was brought to my attention, someone asked me about the possibility of more opening up other areas for tundras. What tundra swan what is your thoughts of southern or of Utah County, south of Utah Lake? I'm hearing that there are not a large number, but there are tundra swans there, and they don't have it. They're not seeing trumpeters there. Is that a possibility to open that up and maybe give more opportunity to hunters and to take a tundra and less of a chance of having an accidental take of a trumpeter?
I mean, that's something we could approach the flyway with, but they mandate which counties that we're allowed to hunt swans, and it's Davis, Box Elder, Weber, a portion of Tooele County, and Cache County, I believe. And right now, that's what we're working with within their framework. So I'm sure we'd have to provide some justification over time if we wanted to,
Let's add that to the list of things to do, please. Will you please? Okay, Kevin.
Just one real quick clarification. If someone takes a trumpeter and you confiscate it. They also, their permit, their swan permit for the year is gone, right?
Right, we had that discussion earlier today. That's their one and done permit. They're not going to be issued another permit.
Is that how it currently stands, or is that based upon the proposal from last night?
But based upon our discussion today, if this came to fruition through the Wildlife Board, that's how it would work out. They would get issued a swan permit, and if they harvested a trumpeter, they would not be issued another permit.
For just 1 year or for a period of time? Just for that year?
And the 5-year waiting period that the Wildlife Board put in place last year, that's still on the books, so.
Any other questions? From the RAC, seeing none, I'd like to open it up for questions from members of the public that are here. Do we have any? Yes. I failed to mention when you go up, if you would state your name also, and we'll have you go to the mic to the right, please. My right.
Brett Perks. I'm curious, how many years have we had the privilege of hunting swans in Utah?
Sometimes I have to ask Blair because he did this job for so long, but 67 years is.
67 years.
That's what he, yep.
Oh.
Oh.
Since 1967, so 56 years. And how many times have we closed the season prior to the mandated, or not mandated, but the prescribed season?
Yeah, the season was never closed early until 2019.
Until 2019. Right. And what happened in 2019 that caused that, or what was the incidence to that?
Right. We opened up public shooting grounds, and we also had an influx of trumpeter swans into the state. So,
influx of trumpeter swans. All right. Thank you. I didn't do enough homework, I'm sorry, but do you know what other states are allowed to hunt swans, and if they have the same regulations on trumpeters that we do?
So the states have different quotas and regulations. Montana, Nevada, and Utah can hunt swans. I think the quota in Nevada is still 10. Blair was able to bring our quota up to 20. He took that to the flyway. And then Montana has a self-reporting system, and they don't have a quota.
They don't have a quota. All right. So
How do we sign up for that?
go hunt in Montana. So just to clarify, the penalty for killing a trumpeter would be just to lose, your bird is confiscated, I can't even say that word, and you put on a 5-year wait period before you can apply again. Yeah, is that what it would be under the current recommendation?
So the Central Region RAC suggested that they would like us to be able to take possession of the trumpeter swan, but not criminalize the take. And we've had a discussion today. We're exploring our codes and rules, and we believe that that's a possibility. That the state could maintain ownership of the swan and not make it criminal.
Do you think that 5 years is sufficient? Or does it need to be longer or shorter?
Yeah, I think the 5-year waiting period they put in place last, I mean, the Wildlife Board put in a 5-year waiting period. I think that if the Wildlife Board ended up passing this recommendation where we could take possession of the swan, and there was also a 5-year waiting period, that's a lot of cumulative type of disincentives to take a trumpeter, I think.
I mean, it would be for me.
Right.
Maybe just offer, so Blair String, I'm Assistant Wildlife Section Chief, just to offer a little clarification. So our current recommendation would be that it would be illegal to take a trumpeter swan. And so yeah, to not make it illegal would be this Central Region RAC's recommendation.
Okay. That's okay. I was kind of thinking that that's where the route you guys were going. All right. Thank you very much.
Is there any other questions from members of the public? All right, we'll turn the time over to Ben to give us the feedback on the public comments.
Okay. Not surprisingly, we had a few more votes on this item. So 17 total votes, 10 strongly disagreed, 2 somewhat agreed, and 5 strongly agreed. There were a number of comments provided to give a little bit more feedback. So the confusion around the 100,000 swan population size added to a lot of the comments that were a lot of people felt like, well, based on the 100,000, obviously we have plenty of swans. Why is this a problem? Granted, swan numbers seem to be pretty good, but it's not 100,000. So other than those comments, clearly people were concerned about the criminalization of incidental take. There were a number of people that preferred going back to the old boundary prior to the change. And there were a number of concerns expressed about the waste of birds. Potentially there'd be people that harvest a trumpeter, don't want to check it or for fear of getting in trouble or a citation, and they might waste the bird. So again, I think that concern might be somewhat mitigated too by some of the things that Jason shared as well.
Okay. With that, we'll now go to public comment. Got quite a few cards here. Brett, that was just up here. I believe you're the first. Well, Brett will be the first to comment. After him, we'll then have Cole. Following Cole, we'll then hear from, we'll go there.
Thanks, Brett Perks. My thought on this is I've hunted swans for over 30 years, introduced my kids to it, enjoy it. Never had an issue where I had to, never had an issue where I've shot a trumpeter. None of my family, none of my friends. And so this is kind of all new to me. But I would lean towards not making the harvest of a trumpeter a criminal act, because mistakes happen. I've talked to a number of other swan hunters and asked them in flight, can you identify the difference between a trumpeter and a tundra? And none of them confidently said, yes, I can. I don't think it's that easy. And I've hunted for quite a while. I'm not a biologist. I'm not a professional hunter, but I don't think it can be done that easy. So I don't think you should criminalize it. On the other hand, I think there should be penalties. There should be some loss of privilege, whether that's 5 years or more. I'm okay with that, for the drawing period. If it's the bird being taken away, I'm okay with that. But I don't think you should criminalize it. I asked the questions about the dates and when it's been closed. And what I've noticed is every year since 2019, the season closes earlier. And we need to solve that. There's a lot of people that are getting ripped off as far as their tag goes, their opportunity to go hunt. I mean, you can hunt from October 1st or the open of the waterfowl hunt, whenever it is, until December 10th or 9th. But in reality, there's not a swan to hunt until November in Utah. So you do have to wait. And if it's closing on November 10th or November 15th, you haven't had very much time to really go out and hunt. Kind of my opinion on that is let's pull back the boundary to where it was before we had an issue with closing the season early, which is eliminating public shooting grounds and adjacent areas where trumpeters are bound to be harvested.
Thank you. Thanks. Then after Cole, we'll hear from Cody Reese, and after Cody, Angie.
So one of the things that I was just thinking about throughout this is if someone incidentally harvests a trumpeter and they know they're going to incur a 5-year ban, and they're, a repeat swan hunter, they do that year after year, that really is going to disincentivize them to actually come forward with that bird. I mean, they could tag the bird at the refuge or at public shooting grounds, go home, and then they may not report that they harvested a bird. And so that's impacting, the federal issue where we're harvesting more trumpeters than are necessary. Of course, there's people who just want the clout, and so they'll try to say something on social media. But if they know there's going to be a ban, then I'm dealing with a lot of different issues on this, and it's a little conflicting. So my ideas kind of stem. There's a ban right now. I believe people shot trumpeters this year and did not report them. That's my honest opinion on it. So they probably would have closed even earlier if they had reported those trumpeters. So I think like my dad said, in this sense, stepping back a little bit and reducing the area where we know trumpeters are being harvested. I independently did a FOIA request a couple months ago on swan harvest because I was kind of perturbed by it a little bit, and I just wanted to know why it keeps getting shut down earlier, where the swans were being shot. I mean, this was before we had any information previously. And in all of the box elder units for the last 4 years as it's being closed, you have the refuge, Bear River Refuge, you have Box Elder County Other, you have Box Elder Private, and then there's a couple others, but then you have primarily public shooting grounds. In almost every one of those units over the last 4 years, the percentage of trumpeters as opposed to the percentage of total harvest is always higher. So there's more trumpeters that are being shot compared to the total number of birds in the aggregate in all of these box elder units up in that northern area. I've hunted the box elder. I've hunted, further south. So the question comes into play: is this a harvest goal, or is this an opportunity hunt? Are we really going to concern ourselves with the number of swans that are being harvested as opposed to shutting down some of these units where we know they're being harvested, and we know that the date that this hunt is being closed is earlier and earlier every single year? So we know there's more trumpeters coming into Utah. We know that more are being shot. It's getting closed earlier.
You've got 5 seconds. Sorry, I should have been paying attention to that. But
So I would
I'll
just
give you
say
20
close
seconds.
down and go to the old borders at a minimum, if not reducing it further south. Thank you.
Thank you. Cody, step out. So he missed. I have a feeling we know what he'll talk about. Okay, so we'll go to Angie.
Angie Wanacott representing SFW. So at the Central Region yesterday, we supported the recommendation that the division provided. And then after hearing what the Central RACs were looking at and what the division has agreed to trying to work out, we actually support the Central Region's motion with the caveat that the division's able to go through with that. So
Thank you. And so Cody's comment card here says, do not agree with the closure of trumpeter swans and essentially criminalizing the mistake by someone shooting the wrong species. So I think they're concerned about youth. As I listened to his comments from last night as well, just they wanted to make sure that there wasn't a penalty given for youth who had accidentally taken a trumpeter. All right, that is all of our comment cards. So we're now going to go to the rack for comments. I think Kevin would like to go first.
I would love to hunt with you because we see things a lot the same way. I sat in blinds. I've hunted waterfowl my whole life, and I'm an avid waterfowl hunter. I hunt 3 or 4 times a week. And we take on a responsibility when we hunt to be able to identify the animal that we're taking, the species, and whether it's deer, whether it's elk, whatever, waterfowl. I don't have any trouble at all identifying a trumpeter versus a tundra. They don't even fly the same to me, and they sure sound a lot different. But so having said that, if we decriminalize the taking of the trumpeter swan, we are just saying, go ahead and do it, and you'll be okay. We're just going to take your permit. I just don't feel good about that. I want to teach my kids, my grandkids, ethical hunting, how to identify what they're shooting at. Don't pull the trigger until you know, and enjoy it rather than being afraid of it. That's just my comment.
I think for me, I want to thank the Central Region RAC. I think that's a pretty good approach. I think the confiscation solves the boundary problem. I think for everybody, I think you're going to impact the whole group of swan hunters, including those that are questionably targeting trumpeter swans. So I want to thank the Central Region RAC for thinking outside the box, and I appreciate the division for looking into it and see if we can pull that off. So.
All right. First, the comment that I have, I would like the RAC to consider something. I do believe that, in my opinion, that the confiscation may help. It's hard to know exactly what it will do, but I don't think it's going to hurt. But I also want the RAC to maybe consider, and we could ask the division their opinion on a possible split or a quota to say that at the beginning of the season that the current unit is open the way that it is, knowing that there are 20 limit of 20 trumpeters that can be taken, and propose that possibly at the take of 10 trumpeters, we then be a trigger mechanism to close the area on the old north boundary. So it would still give in the beginning opportunity for people to get out. It'll let us continue to offer the amount of permits that we have. And as we get closer, and if we see that we're still having a high number of trumpeters being taken, then we could close that boundary down. It may be a little complicated, may not, but I think the two things could help provide more opportunity.
I think to some degree you put everybody in one spot and you take a good place to hunt swans out of the equation. For me, I'm not a swan hunter, but I'm just visualizing this. If I know the swan's gonna be confiscated and I'm gonna have to sit out 5 years, you could put me anywhere and I'd be paying attention. And so I think the fact that the confiscation and the 5-year wait allows people to keep shooting at public shooting grounds and having a great time shooting tundra swans. I don't think that, for me, you shove them all over here and then you have a number of swans that if they're harvested, we close this down. I think then you cram them all in one spot, and it kind of messes with the quality of the hunt for everyone, is my thought.
But it does extend. I mean, we will have it open for some time, but if we don't, they're not going to have an opportunity anyway, because it's going to be closed even sooner. We put a 5-year waiting permit period, and it did nothing. In fact, I think it even incentivized it more. I don't think they cared. It did nothing. So they did keep the bird. So it might help, but the waiting period last year didn't do a thing, in my opinion. Anyway, that were comments. I've had Casey reaching out to me, and he'd like to comment.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the discussion. I guess my big hang up on this whole thing is we don't have data, right? I think the recommendation of the division is totally anecdotal. Ben, I appreciate the specifics of Facebook and then a check, but correlation doesn't equal causation. I am certainly not defending people who knowingly break the rules. I just don't think we're going to fix the problem. I mean, last year, the Wildlife Board made the 5-year waiting period, and like Justice said, it happened even sooner. In my opinion, the only data point that we can correlate to is prior to 2019, we didn't have a problem, and after 2019, we've had a problem every year. And so that is the influx point. And it's not like in 1 year an entire population fundamentally shifted and we dumped a pile of trumpeters in. I don't think that's a realistic biological expectation, but we did change the boundary. And so I'd be okay with a component of what Justin's recommending, but I really don't think that, I think what will happen under a confiscating rule is we'll still hit the trigger because public is where it happens. And then a lot of birds will have died and gone to waste. Like, I eat my swans, I eat my ducks, but some dude's got to be starving at the food bank before he's going to take a swan. I mean, come on, you really got to know how to cook it. You really got to want to eat it. So the reality is these birds are going to waste, and I really have a problem with just wanton waste of wildlife. So that's my concern with the confiscation as well.
Okay.
Jamie is raising her hand.
Oh, Jamie. Sorry, I didn't see there. Okay, Jamie.
Can you help me understand, like, are there like tagging stations or people take these into the Northern Region office? Like, there's kind of no enforcement like on the ground is, you know, if you're at the public shooting grounds, I mean, could that be incorporated in some way?
I can sure they're out there. I've been checked multiple times, you know, out there. We have Wyatt right here. We'll let him address. No, there's not.
Sorry, I was shooting the breeze with Blair, but what was the question?
Is there some on the ground monitoring? You know, like as like people are leaving the public shooting grounds or the Bear River Migratory Bird Refuge, is there on the ground monitoring of tundra swans and trumpeter swans that are leaving that have been killed?
Yeah, whenever we identify kind of a significant change or what we feel like will be a significant change in a regulation, we tried to dedicate some more efforts to that. So looking at enforcement efforts prior to last year when the board instated that or created the 5-year waiting period, we had an increased work effort last year as compared to previous years, and we can certainly ensure that that occurs this year and well as it would make sense to do so. So the short answer is yes.
So do you think that's why numbers have gone up? Is that one reason?
No, we do measure swans in the field, but I wouldn't say that I don't have the data for this, but a substantial number of them are measured at regional offices or Bear River Bird Refuge. So if we put a percentage on it, the number of birds we're actually measuring in the field, I would assume is pretty low compared to the total numbers harvested.
And I just have one more question. I'm sorry, I know I'm supposed to comment on that question, but like, what is if I were to go out and go hunting and I shot a trumpeter swan under this new proposed rule, what would be the consequence be? What would that be?
It could range, I guess, but it could be up to, in the proposed rule, meaning it's illegal to harvest one, correct? Just to want to confirm. Yeah, so it could be up to a Class B misdemeanor, $190, $200 fine, something like that. And I should state that we deal with accidental harvests all the time. We deal with youth accidental harvest all the time. That isn't anything new to enforcement. I feel like our officers do a phenomenal job at weighing each individual situation. So I know that that's been a concern presented. It's not one that I have, but I understand why that concern's there. But enforcement of illegal harvest specifically by youth is nothing new to our officers. So I guess to say whether we issue a warning or citation, I mean, that's all up in the air, but I feel confident that we make good judgment calls there if that's ended up what was implemented.
All right. Oh, do you have a comment? Okay. I believe Blair has some information. I know in the discussion, we've asked a few things about, we're talking about the public shooting grounds and some numbers, and Blair has some information that may help the RAC with their decision on some of the data that's come from public shooting.
While Blair's pulling up his thing, I'm going to ask one of those naive non-hunter questions that I'm famous for. What does a public hunting ground mean? How is that different from like the refuge or I understand like private land, but how is that different? I'm wondering why it's so
Let
triggering.
Blair address that to you.
Yeah, so we have names for all of our waterfowl management areas, and so public shooting grounds is the name of one of our areas we manage. And so it's very confusing, so I totally understand why.
Okay, that helps, thank you. And it's, I should have just asked.
Yeah, so we've got some data that we put together that wasn't available for the presentation that I think kind of ties a lot of these conversations together. As Casey mentioned, like we don't have a lot of really good targeting information, but we do have some really good data kind of showing the percentage of trumpeters and where they're shot based on the total number of swan take. And so Jody, I don't know if you can share that and make it a little bit bigger. I'll run through some of this. Okay, can you guys see that? Someone, okay, perfect. So this is a slide you're probably familiar with. It was part of our presentation. It shows that prior to 2019, we had the majority of our swans being taken on Bear River Refuge. It was about 34%. Harold Crane was in there, it was about 20%. And then as we opened up this northern area, we saw a lot of those people basically pull off of those areas and move to public shooting grounds. And part of that is just because it's a really easily accessible place. It's a good place to hunt swans. So I wanted to pull some of that data and kind of look at the number of swans we've taken over the years and the percentage of essentially trumpeter swans in that total number of swans taken. And so if you look at Bear River Refuge, for example, I mean, that's been open really since we opened the swan hunt a long time ago. You can see that prior to 2019, the number of trumpeter swans there on average was pretty low given the total number of swans that were taken. However, as we approach that 2019 number, you can see, or year, oh, it didn't? Okay. That's probably not helpful then. Can you see it like that instead? Okay. All right. So yeah, going back, this shows 2015 through 2022. You can see prior to 2019, we took a lot of swans at Bear River Refuge, but there was a very low percentage of those that were actually trumpeter swans. But that 2019 year was really significant in terms of the number of trumpeters that started showing up, as well as just a lot of the changes we made at that time. So really, I mean, it was just a poor year to probably implement a lot of these changes. You can see that at Bear River Refuge in particular, the number of swans shot there continually goes down each year as more of those people start going to public shooting grounds. However, you can see that the percentage of those that were trumpeters continues to, I mean, almost increase. 2021 in particular, you can see only 62 swans were shot there, but about 8% of those were trumpeters. And the same kind of holds true with the other parts of Box Elder County. Those weren't huntable, but as soon as we did, a lot of people were able to shoot trumpeters there for whatever reason, and we don't know for sure why. Public shooting grounds, again, you can see that as soon as we opened it, that starts to increase as we see more trumpeter swan shot there. But really, if you compare the numbers of public shooting grounds to the refuge, I mean, they're fairly comparable. I mean, really about 2 to 3% of the swans that are shot there are going to be trumpeter swans. And so I think that kind of brings into this bigger picture of, I mean, are trumpeter swans just on public or is it a bigger area? And really, it's a lot broader than just public shooting grounds. I mean, there's just a lot of trumpeter swans there in general. To kind of frame it a little bit more too, the distance between public shooting grounds and Bear River Refuge is really not much. If you've never been there before, this blue circle is really where a lot of the swans will rest. We'll count sometimes 20, 30, even 40,000 swans within that blue circle. A lot of them sit there and then they move north into public shooting grounds, and they move south, they move east into kind of all these marshes in that Box Elder County area. So again, the proximity of the two really aren't a whole lot of distance. And so it's brought questions in our mind of, I mean, closing public shooting grounds is probably going to reduce some of the trumpeter swan harvest, but you're likely just going to be shifting that to Bear River Refuge, because if you start shooting a lot more trumpeter swans there, you're likely going to have a lot more trumpeter swans. And given that we can only shoot 20, we're likely to hit the quota again. And so that kind of comes back to the overall goals we had for our recommendation in general. And those were, one, to just prevent the close of the swan season. We know this is a huge frustration for all the hunters out there. We know that it's a real sticky point, and really the crux of all that is trumpeter swans. And so we felt like if we could make trumpeter swan harvest illegal, or at least stop people from being able to have that trophy status of swans, it would probably discourage people from taking them. And so Looking at that, that's kind of where we settled on making it illegal in the first place, was just because it would stop people from taking trumpeter swans, or at least hopefully stop them from taking them. The second thing to that is really maintaining swan hunting opportunity. And so the last 2 years, we saw over 40% of the swans being shot at public shooting grounds. And so, yeah, there's a problem with people taking trumpeters, but it's a huge opportunity for people to go there and just be able to harvest a swan. We also manage this property specifically for waterfowl hunting. And so it's really hard in our mind to close this property down where we manage it specifically for people to go and participate in the sport of waterfowl hunting. So kind of in our mind, like we focused on that trumpeter component to our recommendation. There's been a really good idea come through a central region, and now that we've researched it, I think we could make that happen as well. So hopefully I give you some background information, some stuff to talk about as you guys think about your recommendation tonight. So,
Blair, before you sit down, can you go back to that slide?
Sure. Which one?
That shows the percentage.
Sure. Yep.
I guess I don't like the presentation in percentages. 8% of 62 and 1.7% of 238 is the same number. It's 4 swans.
Yep.
So I think it's, yeah. I think maybe we're overestimating what's going to happen if we shut down public, and we're going to harvest more on Bear River when we don't have the data to show that we did it prior.
Yeah. So, I mean, we do have a couple of years, I guess, of where it's been open on both the areas. And I mean, really percentage wise, I mean, you're probably going to end up shooting about the same, I guess, in our mind, but.
Can you give the percentages? This is based on overall swans, but just on our 20, I know this came up yesterday, and I know there's confusion, but based on the 20 quota, what percentage of those were killed on public shooting grounds? Did I miss that? I'm sorry.
Yes, I can. Actually, I think it is part of a slide in this presentation. I forgot. Yeah. So I don't have the percentages, I don't think, but here's the actual numbers of what we've checked over the last 4 years. Prior to that, I mean, it was, anywhere from like 1 to 3 on Bear River Refuge. We get some at Harold Crane. We get some at Ogden Bay. We get some, honestly, down by the airport in Salt Lake. It's kind of all over the place, but for the most part, most of those trumpeter swans are being shot in that Bear River Refuge, public shooting grounds, and the private property around that. So.
Something I've got to point out why this slides up. A couple things, and Blair, you referenced them, but I want to reinforce a couple things. One, when we opened up those northern area, or when those northern areas were opened up, there was also an increase of an additional 750 tags or tags. That's a lot more tags. If you reduce the argument against reducing the border, is now you've got an additional 750 people fighting over or hunting in the much smaller area. I think you have to factor that in. The other thing that slide was showing, there's absolutely no way you can leave the private property open if you reduce the boundaries. Public shooting ground is a huge thing for public, but if you go back and you look at those numbers from the private property, there's almost as many birds shot in the private clubs up there as there are in the public shooting grounds. And there's far fewer hunters on those private clubs than there are in the public shooting grounds. So I want to throw that out for considerations when it comes to borders and boundaries, that type of thing.
Okay. I know we reverted to a lot of questions again, but I think we've had a lot of comments, I hope everyone's been educated a lot. I don't know if there's anything else that's going to be said that hasn't been said. So instead of repeating things, I think everyone feel comfortable if we are entertaining motions. Okay, let's do that. If we would like to, so I know we have the proposal, let's talk that, we have the proposal that was presented by the by the division. And then we also have a proposal that was given by the central that the division is essentially presented to us as well. So we have those two things plus any other type of proposal that we might have. So does that make sense? So I guess maybe we could, if we feel comfortable breaking it up, we can. Just whatever you do, we've got to remember we have the rule that's been presented. We also now have the rule that was the motion that was made in the central RAC, plus anything else that we may add to that. So just keep that in mind as any motions are being made.
I'll do it. It's not actually what I came in thinking of doing, but with some of the comments and stuff that were made, I think we mirrored the recommendation made by the central RAC so that trumpeter swans that are inadvertently or intentionally taken, we'll never know which, are confiscated without penalty.
I'll second.
So the motion by Randy to, we'll just say to mirror the central motion, and a second by Mike. Any discussion on the motion before we call for a vote?
So just clarification, that includes the 5-year wait period, correct?
That's already in rule anyway.
That's already.
Okay, I'm going to call for a vote. Ryan?
Yes.
Brad?
Yes.
Jamie?
Yes.
Paul?
Yes.
David?
Yes.
Junior? Oh, sorry, Randy?
Yes.
Emily?
Yes.
Matt? Yes. Mike?
Yes.
Kevin?
No.
Darren?
Yes.
And Casey texts me no as well. So motion passes. Motion passes 10-2. This time I'll give Casey an opportunity to state his reason for voting against it, and then Kevin.
Yeah, I'll just reinstate kind of what I've already said. I think this is a boundary issue. I think we're still going to hit the quota next year, unfortunately, and I think that just is going to mean that birds were shot and not used. I really don't think there's a market for donated waterfowl meat. Just having tried to give it to my friends and neighbors for free, and cook, I just don't think that's a realistic possibility. I really don't like wasting wildlife. So,
Kevin.
For reasons that I've stated before, and to me, all you do is kick the problem down the road if you decriminalize it. I think you just need to make the taking of a trumpeter swan illegal until you can get this isotope study done and do some work down the road. But it just muddies the water too much to just say, well, if you do it, it's really kind of okay, and we'll look at it later. Evidence, I've been in law enforcement my whole career. Evidence says that they're targeted. I mean, there's no question that they're targeted. And I could argue that forever, but for those reasons, I think that we should accept as the division had proposed.
Okay. So we now have that motion that is passed. We still have the remainder of what is on there, plus anything else that we may like to add. If I could make a motion, I know what I would say.
Can you remind us what the remainder is?
Well, what the remainder is, I guess, basically, by what we just did, we've already stated that we're not accepting as presented, correct? So it would be what would be the way to, are we done?
Yeah.
Is there any, I guess, unless there's further other recommendations. I wish we would. I agree with what Casey said. This is going to help, but it's not going to fix the I don't think it's going to fix it. We're still going to be closed. I think there's one more thing we could do that would really help, but that's my opinion. 12 hours on the phone today trying to make that happen. Hopefully the wildlife board's listening. Okay. Yep. All right. Yep, exactly. So I think that I've been getting a few texts that we have some people that would really appreciate a bathroom break. So we're going to just take I think it's gonna be quick, 5 minutes, and then we'll return. Open it. Seat, please. Don't want Jody upset with me. What was that? RBF? I don't want to see that. All right, we're going to, are we back live? Okay. We're going to go ahead now and go to our next agenda item, which is agenda item number 8, live game bird rule, amendments. I have Avery Cook here, who's Upland Game Project Leader. Avery, as we dive into this agenda item, is there anything that you'd like to add to what you've already, from what was in your presentation?
Yep, I'd like to make a couple changes or updates from the presentation. First one was just basically a typo, and we fixed some wording to reflect the intent that dog training groups could have a field trial or other event at the DWR dog training areas without requiring an additional COR with approval of that area manager. So basically just keeping it as is. Also, with the definition of pheasant, it was a little bit narrow, as pointed out by another RAC member, where it was just the genus Phasiensis for pheasants, which is your kind of your typical ringneck. But want to expand that to Ceramaticus, which is your Reeves and copper pheasant, and Chrysolophensis, which is like your golden and lady Amherst pheasant. So, and aside from that, it would be as presented.
Okay. Do we have any questions from members of the RAC? I know we do.
One short, easy one. It's the Upland Game meeting. Stop. The most important meeting of the year.
Thank you for being here. Yes.
No, I was just going to check with you, and I mentioned something a little bit earlier. Any of the change or any of the proposals, will they benefit or help reduce the possibility of spreading disease?
Yeah, so one of the significant changes in the rule, aside from mostly the rules about kind of simplification and condensing rules into a more understandable format, but one substantive changes is a little bit of an increase in our disease testing requirements for people both holding pen-reared game birds and releasing those birds. So there's avian influenza has been increasing throughout the United States and the globe. So we've got increasing concern about having some pen-reared game birds, both as reservoirs for disease and possibility of transferring that disease to our wild populations. So we're adding a requirement, a disease testing requirement for avian influenza, as well as for a couple other diseases that are of concern to the captive poultry industry. So we've got a considerable number of turkey and chicken farms in the state, and there's a few diseases that are of concern to them, and there's possibility of these diseases moving from pen-reared game birds to wild populations to poultry farms. So also having disease testing requirements prior to release for Mycoplasma gallisepticum and Mycoplasma synovae, as well as Salmonella pylorum and typhoid.
And if you don't know this, it's okay. But all the releases for the pheasants and the checkers that are done between private and the state agencies, have they been being tested up to this point?
We've had a bit. Our requirements have been kind of vague. We've got some internal protocols that require disease testing before we release the birds that we raise. As far as private individuals, they're required now to get them from basically a disease-free source, but we didn't have as much requirement in place for testing before release. So we have not really had much in place to date.
But that's addressed now with this new rule, correct?
Yes.
Right. Yep. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Any other questions? Do we have any questions from members of the audience here in the public? All right, turn the time over to Ben.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We had 2 total votes. one strongly disagreed, one strongly agreed. No written comments, so we have no idea why.
Thanks for your help. Okay. Well, now I don't believe there was any public comment on this item as well. If there is any that didn't come up, if you'd come forward at this time. All right, let's go to RAC discussion.
I appreciate you guys doing this, updating it, and I'd love to make a motion if no one else has anything.
Please do.
To accept the proposal as presented.
We got a motion by Randy and a second by Kevin to accept as presented. Any discussion on the motion? Let's call for a vote. Brian?
Yes.
Brad?
Yes.
Jamie?
Yes.
Paul?
Yes.
David?
Yes.
Randy?
Yes.
Emily?
Yes.
Matt?
Yes.
Mike?
Yes.
Kevin?
Yes.
Darren?
Yes.
Is Casey still with us? Yes? No, I'm not seeing Casey on there. Nikki?
Yes.
All right. I will say motion passes unanimously with those who voted. Hey, we'll go to the next agenda item number 9, collection and importation and possession rule amendments. We have Charles Lyons here, Assistant Attorney General. This time, is there anything that you would like to present that wasn't in the presentation already?
Yeah. First, I'd just like to introduce myself. I mean, I haven't really spoken with any of you personally. I've seen you and listened to this, so I really appreciate all of the good conversation and discussion that goes in here. I've been representing the division for almost a year now, and I'm just happy to be here and to see you all in person and see how you operate. It's been really great for me. So you've watched the video. 3 changes that have come up based on comments from members of the public and then internally with division staff. One of them is in the initial video. We mentioned that previous certificates of registration would be grandfathered in under this new rule and they would not be affected by this. And so we added language into the rule, making that in the rule so that there's more certainty, because that was a concern from one member of the public that brought that to the division. The other 2 changes are from the aquatics section in that part of the rule. And there is a tweak to the definition of ornamental aquatic animal species. And then there is a addition for importation of ornamental aquatic animal species that whoever is in possession of that after importation, they need to be able to provide to the division a Fish and Wildlife Service importation form if those animal species came internationally. So those are the only changes that have made. Otherwise, everything has remained the same. And those are really more technical things that are going to help the division be able to enforce that rule better going forward. So.
Thank you. Does anyone from the RAC have any questions? Good. Does anyone from the public have any questions? You're getting by easy. We get the, go to Ben for the public feedback.
Big surprise here. We have a total of 2 votes. Shockingly strong opinions. 1 strongly disagrees and 1 strongly agrees without any comments provided.
Again, if you're listening, please help us. Give us some information. All right. With that, we'll go to public comment. We don't have any cards at this time, so we'll go to RAC discussion or comments. If there aren't any, I'd again entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion that we accept it as explained and presented.
I have a motion by Ryan
I'll second.
and a second by Nikki to accept as presented. Guessing there's no discussion, so I'm going to call, I guess, is there any discussion on it? I'm going to call for a vote if not. All right. Ryan?
Yes.
Brad?
Yes.
Jamie?
Yes.
Paul?
Yes.
David?
Yes.
Randy?
Yes.
Emily?
Yes.
Matt?
Yes.
Mike?
Yes.
Kevin?
Yes.
Darren?
Yes.
Casey, I don't believe is with us any longer. Nikki?
Yes.
All right, motion passes unanimously. Thank you. All right, we're to agenda item number 10, CWMU variance requests. So I see Jim, is Chad not with us, or are we going to do both?
So Chad was going to join us online, and so kind of tag team.
Okay, there he is. All right, we've got him. As we start this agenda item, I'm just going to ask, there's a lot of moving parts that have become evident because of this request. And I'm just going to ask that RAC members consider what the request and what these variances are. And as you think of them, I know that there's going to be a lot of comments about some of the process, and I think we can discuss them, but I want to remember what we're here to discuss are these variances and not the whole CWMU rule as presented. I think we're good to discuss things. I don't want to offend anyone, but if we feel like it's getting off topic, I may ask that we come back on so that we can address what we're here to address. That being said, we all have right to talk, and we can discuss the things that are here. So with that, Jim, is there anything you or Chad would like to bring up before we?
Yeah, so I'll let Chad go first, and then I do have some things if he does not touch on them.
Okay.
Yeah, I think tonight I'd like to start off, I think this is the appropriate place to do this, is I know there's been a ton of frustration and a ton of confusion with this variance and with what our trade land maps showed. So first of all, for all of the public hunters that felt like they were out there hunting trade lands and that those were trade lands and were led that way because of our maps, I'm sorry that this is causing the heartache and the heartburn and that you had to go through all this confusion. I would like to extend that same apology to the CWMU, which never intended for that to be trade lands, and have had people probably hunting that area without that being their desire as well. And I'd probably just like to kind of go back in time a little bit. These two, and we're mostly talking North Peaks right now. The two parcels of land that they're looking to add as non-contiguous were in a CWMU and Elk CWMU up until 2018 was the last year that it was. In 2019, that CWMU went away, and they added a lot of the land from Meadow Creek into North Peaks at that point in time. We were talking to the operator about how he wanted to handle that, and it's clear from an email in 2019 that they wanted to only trade 2,040 acres, and those acres were near Grouse Creek or south of Grouse Creek, and not out by the Nevada line. So it's pretty clear that their intent was to never have those be trade lands. So what I'd say going forward is that this variance or this request that they're asking for it fits the rule. There's a process for it. There's not a ton of sideboards, but the process is there. They had to get the biologist sign off on it. They had to get additional division sign off on it. It went through the advisory committee, which got a favorable recommendation there. And now it's going through the RAC and the board. So I feel like it is, and the division recommendation on this is for it to be passed. We feel like that this would be a beneficial thing. That land, otherwise, and I mean, this fall it's going to be posted. They're not going to allow any hunting on it from the public. So really, in my viewpoint, the only way for public hunters to get on there is by drawing a CWMU tag, regardless of whether the variances go, if the variance doesn't go through, then potentially nobody does. If the variance does go through, then potentially some CWMU public tag holders could hunt that. I think I've said my piece, Jim, if you want to add anything.
Okay, yeah, you mainly touched on what I wanted to. I just wanted to make sure that our apology was made to the sportsman as well as the CWMU for that clerical mapping error. And I appreciate the sportsman who pointed that out to us. We have to go through a lot of layers of data and review. And unfortunately, sometimes we miss some of those changes that are made. And we've had some issues in the past where sportsmen have pointed it out to us. And yeah, it would have continued had they not pointed it out to us. And so, or at least until we were able to catch it. And so appreciate them for pointing out that mistake to us and helping us to get it corrected. And not only for this situation, but take a good deep dive into all the other units with trade lands and just their overall CWMU boundary as well as hunt boundaries for the public, just to make sure that we've got everything out there as accurate as possible. So just wanted to make sure to bring that up. And then also with these recommendations that we do make them with the current statute, rule, and management plans that are in place that have been approved. That's what we try to manage for. And so, like I said before, I'll just be here to answer questions, specifically for the North Peaks where it's in the northern region. And I'll just be here for those questions if you have any. Thank you.
Okay, at this time, turn this time over to the RAC to ask questions.
So one point of clarification, when this was part of, was it Meadow Creek before? Was there, because of the makeup of these properties, I'm assuming that was a non-contiguous parcel at that time too. Was there a variance granted then?
No. So when it was part of the Meadow Creek, this is one where the CWMU actually consisted of about 60% public land back in the beginning. So it started out as Twin Peaks Goose Creek CWMU. And that was when elk were first starting to come into Utah, having significant agricultural depredation issues with landowners right along the border there. And so part of the initial elk management plan for West Box Elder was the way to include elk or to have elk and an objective for elk is to allow the private landowners to get some elk tags in their pockets to make it an incentive. And so part of that was, this was way before my time, but yeah, they incorporated, they had to incorporate all that public land in order to join the private parcels that were getting those agricultural damage areas. And so Twin Peaks Goose Creek and then Meadow Creek, it was only elk hunting at that time. Twin Peaks, which later became North Peaks, was only deer hunting at that time. The current operator, as well as the landowner, got together, basically discontinued the Meadow Creek CWMU and just joined the private lands that were contiguous into North Peaks at that time. And then that's when those trade lands that were open for deer hunting only, because it was part of an elk CWMU, that's when they were discontinued as well.
Oh, you might as well stay up, or you or Chad. So, well, for whatever reason, the map was wrong, and the map's now down. Are there trade lands out there in exchange for the 2,000 plus acres of public land?
Yeah, yep. So the Wildlife Board approved those trade lands back in 2019, and so they will still be active. I assume, that'll be a Chad question. I assume that we're just working on that map to make sure it's accurate before it gets posted online once again.
And that is the follow-up questions on that one. So Chad, will the map be up? Because we have lands that have never been used by the public in exchange for public land that can't be used.
Yeah, so they will be up. So when this was brought to our attention, it's probably not a good thing to have, and we probably had that map up incorrect for too long. And we really want to make sure that this map is 100% correct before we display it again. That it'll be up well before hunting season. The goal is June. Have everything reviewed and make sure that it is correct before we post that again.
Okay. Do we know if anyone has been cited for trespassing on this other land that was listed as trade land?
I don't believe so.
No.
All right. Okay. So, but how's this impact the people that, and I don't know how we prove it, but there's got to be people that this is impacting. They put in the draws passed. You put in for where you wanted to hunt. And that may have impacted people's hunts. I don't know. I don't know how you fix that or if there's a fix for that, but so I came in, I have a list and I was going to hit it, but I'm not, simply because of what the board passed at the last meeting. But I am going to say trade lands these have to be addressed. I'm this very land, I actually was out hunting this past year and I came and I asked the division employee, like, this is trade land and it was posted. What's up with that? Like, oh, they're having trespassing problems. It's got to get fixed. We have to have the right information. It's just, it aggravates me. And the variance after variance, the rules that come out, I'm looking forward to
when we
the
get
rules.
some comments, we'll do that as well. So here for questions.
So,
Okay. And just a clarification based on that as well, just to keep somebody from getting in trouble, trade lands is not akin to walk-in access. It's not open for every species. It's only open for the species for which they're trading the permits.
Yeah. I'm glad you said that. Yes, absolutely.
Okay, I guess the question that I'd have, I think it was stated, but one more time, is this, two questions. Is there a difference between a variance and a request when it comes to CWMU boundaries? And in my mind, a variance is something that varies from the rule and a request would be something that fits within the rule. Is there, I don't even know if there's a definition between those two stated in the current rule. Is variance fit all?
I'll leave that one to Chad.
I'll take this one. And if you've read the CWMU rule, you can see that it's pretty vague when it talks about non-contiguous. Really, when it talks about it is if you have a CWMU, you can't have non-contiguous count as part of your base acreage to become a CWMU. The way that I think the division has always viewed these is that it is a variance, that the norm is that you have a contiguous place. With that being said, I think you could argue if you just directly read the rule that it could be interpreted as that it should only be a request. But knowing that that there's scrutiny that's going to come to it, I think that's what led us to this spot where we say let's bring it through the public process. So we're not trying to hide this. We realize it's a little bit different than what most of them look like. So let's have it be scrutinized and looked at and see if it makes sense. And as I said earlier, for the division, both of these make sense to us.
And they do fit within the rule. That would be yes.
Yes.
Okay. Other questions?
And I actually feel bad for North Peaks. They're just perfect storm. Things coming up, questions, problems with I like the CWMU overall, but this is just a perfect storm where they just happen to be the ones where this stuff got found. But when does their renewal? How far out is that, Chad?
They renew this summer. So we'll be hearing the renewal in the fall in November.
Any other questions? Questions from the public?
Chad, Jim, thank you for bringing that up, like the
mistake that was made. I think it's a very big mistake. One question I have is, can anyone from the division like provide some documentation on the trade lands that are correct? Can anybody from the division or somebody tell me, like, did a biologist go out and approve these lands as trade lands? And are they fair and equitable trade lands that the public has received? In my opinion, I do not, I won't get into that, but I just wanted to know, has anybody, or do you have any documentation, a biologist report, anything stating, yes, we went and looked at X parcel, X parcel, X parcel, and they do meet fair and equitable trade as wrote? Just wondering.
Yeah, so I can answer for any of them for the northern region. We do not have a form that specifically addresses, that we have the check boxes for. But when we sign off on it, that means that we agree with it. Now, like with these ones, the biologist at the time, she wrote up with the operator, looked at parcels, and then, agreed to put them through. And we do discuss that as we go through the application process.
So, and I guess that was my question is, so the CWMU operator, he's not just stating, I'm going to give these these trade lands, and we're not just accepting those from his recommendation. There was verification from biologists that this is fair and equitable trade for the public.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. But just no documentation.
Right.
Okay. And this is probably for the attorney, or I'm not sure, but my question is this indeed a variance request, or is it just a request? I wish, I know you answered that question, but is this a variance from the rule, or is this, I wish somebody could nail that down, because it's kind of vague. I mean, it says on the agenda item, it's a variance, but there's a little confusion there.
No, I guess I can speak to that. And I think Chad actually previously did a pretty good summation of where they're at with it. But because this one went through the variance process, it can fit under either or, because it's so vague. And I think they prefer going through this public process and being just open with the whole thing that you might not get under that request process. So because it's typically they're contiguous lands, and because this one would involve non-contiguous lands, I believe that's why they treated it as a variance, and they prefer to go through this and get everybody's input and make sure that everybody understands what's going on, if that helps.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
And then another question I had is, why does the division typically recommend to allow accessible public lands inside the boundaries of a CWMU? Can somebody speak to that? What's the official stance? Why would we allow public lands to be included in a CWMU?
I probably should take that one. Yeah, so that actually goes back to code. In state law under the CWMU, it says that there's three reasons why public land can be in a CWMU. One of those is to make an enforceable boundary. Another one if it's completely surrounded. And then the last one is for our management, to help us with our management. And so as Jim touched on earlier, a lot of these in Box Elder, when we talk about public land in CWMUs, a lot of it is in Box Elder. And to be able to have elk populations out there, and this was done well before Jim or I, right? But to have elk populations out there, we needed buy-in from landowners. And so that's why a lot of that public land is out there, is actually for us to even have elk out there. I think if CWMUs went away, there'd be a potential of having our objective be significantly lower, and potentially even change from limited entry to general season without buy-in from landowners. And North Peak specifically, and to be clear too, tonight we are talking about the variance. North Peak's will come back in November, and that's when we can really talk about, and that's when the recommendations will be made of that public land and of the trade lands. So back in November, or when we come forward to November, we'll have the time to really scrutinize these and get public feedback of whether that public land should be in there. But currently it meets state law, and our rule just copies law that for an enforceable boundary. I think North Peaks, it's fence lines and ridges that make it very visible to the eye is the justification for that public land to be in there. And I think they do actually have some that are completely surrounded by the CWMU and otherwise inaccessible. So really on that, we're just trying to follow state law.
Thanks, Chad. And then my last question is, when did the division first learn about the mapping error? So on the trade lands maps for North Peaks, when did the division first learn about the error that North Peaks had property, or that there was trade land that wasn't supposed to be in it? When did the division first learn that?
If you want me to take that one, I can tell you when I did. And that was when it went through the variance, when they went to the CWMU advisory committee back in February. We had two meetings in February. So either the beginning or the end of February is when it came to my attention.
And I guess, so to follow up with that, so why did it take until April 20th to take the lands off? So it was online up until April 19th showing these as trade lands. Why from February all the way into the end of April, right through the application process, we knew there was an error. Why did it take so long? I'm having trouble understanding like why we would have compounded the problem and made it worse.
Yeah, and that's a frustration that I share with you, Travis, there, because I sent out requests for that to be changed and for us to update it. And it was several requests, and I personally am not very good at map making. I didn't have the capabilities of doing it myself. We did have turnover in that position. We lost our GIS person. So I think that between that and some other things, it just took time. But it wasn't from a lack of effort on my side. I saw it the same way. I kept trying and said, please, let's get these off until we can get them corrected. And it took till April, and it sucks. And I apologize. I wish it wouldn't have taken that long. And I wish people had the accurate information for the hunt. And yeah, on that one, we've just got to own it as a division, communicate better, get things through a little bit quicker.
And so the date, and you guys talked about it, this kind of, but is there like a hard date, or you guys are shooting for to have these trade lands maps back online? Because right now, like was mentioned, there's no trade lands available to the general public. Like there's no maps. The only source we have is the Utah Hunt Planner. So is that like, do you guys have a date in mind? I mean, you said before hunting season. I hope it's well before that, when people start getting draw results and can start to plan their hunt. So that was my last question.
Yeah, and I would say mid-June, Travis, is like really the date that I want to have it done. So, we have probably half of them that have been verified. We're working on that other half and just making sure that they're there. We have a new GIS person that I've been working with, and so we'll be able to get that together. And yeah, we just have probably another 6 or so that we need to tie up and get it on. So yeah, mid-June is my goal for have them on by then, but for sure.
Thank you.
Okay, on the public questions, as I mentioned, this is delicate. There's a lot to talk about. I think Travis brought up some valid points. We had some questions that aren't pertaining to this agenda item, the variance, but it has been brought to light because of this agenda item that there's some issues that need to be addressed. For those that you didn't remember, in the Wildlife Board last week or 2 weeks ago, there was a motion made in the Wildlife Board, and it was passed that they are given till June of 2025 for an advisory committee to put together to come up with a new CWMU rule. And these are a lot of the things that we're hoping to be addressed. And so with these same questions, what's been brought up, and for those who are listening and anyone else that might have public questions, I want you to think about that and have those ready so when that time comes that we do, when the CWMU rule is open and we are addressing them, that these comments and these things can be brought up. Again, to the RAC, just ask you to, it's good to know what's going on with these things, but again, we're here to address this agenda item, which are these variances. And so, is there other questions from the public that haven't already been asked that would be different, that pertain directly to this agenda item? Okay, seeing that, we'll turn the time over to Ben to go to the public feedback.
On this item, we had 10 total votes. All 10 were strong disagreement. And the Wildlife Board is going to get an earful on these. But most of the comments that are provided for the northern region were kind of summed up by Mr. Hobbs in his questions. I think it'll relate to the trade lands issue, some disagreements with the program as a whole that go beyond the discussion tonight and their decision tonight. So
I think this is a perfect example why it's important to put your comments. You strongly disagree, but we're also able to read the comments and the reasons for the disagreements. That's why it's important. As you look at the disagreements on this, hopefully everyone read those. By and far, it was all to do with the CWMU rules that are in place and wanting to see changes. And it's fair to say not so much, there were a few that were specific about, I want to say there were some that were very specific about denying this request, but the majority had to do with the overall rule of the CWMUs at this time.
Yep, and frustrations over the map issues too.
In that as well. So, okay. All right. We'll go to public comment cards now. We'll hear first from Benji Eames. After Benji, we'll then hear from Travis, and at the end, we'll hear from Gary.
Thanks for taking a minute. I just wanted to comment. It sounds like we've already talked about it just on the mapping issues. Just because all the public, was putting in, I think it was due April 27th when we were due to put in. And I know some people that's actually put in out there that hunt around that corner of the state and they know it really well. And so this could affect their hunt. And the other thing is too, as a landowner, with the CWMU operator, he's in a bad way because same thing, the map issue. So just to Jim and Chad, I'm hoping we can at least go through our mapping at least once a year before the draws and figure that out before it gets to this point. And I do appreciate what you guys do. I know it's a big deal, but that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Travis.
Again, I appreciate it, guys. I am strongly opposed to this variance request. I have a hard time understanding how the division can, on one hand, recommend to take quality public land from the general hunting public to make clear and definable boundaries, and on the other hand, recommend that we add 2 additional non-contiguous properties that are over a mile away from the boundary that do nothing but add confusion and do the exact opposite of making clear and definable boundaries. I truthfully believe these properties should have been in trade lands, and if the original trade land maps would have been accurate, I would have been in here screaming in 2019. If they would have been, when I received a map from the northern region in 2019, it was a printed out map, showed these properties as trade lands. So it wasn't just the hump planner. I believe the public has lost over 2,000 acres of prime public land out there and have received low quality land that's 15 miles away in rabbit habitat as best. It's a sad situation. The public has taken it in the shorts, in my opinion, on this deal. I also believe these trade land maps are a giant error. This is all the public has. When we give up public land, this is all we have. And when there are errors made like this is egregious, like serious errors. I believe we have to get this right. The mapping has got to be improved. I hope when the Rural Committee looks at this, that they seriously dive in and require survey grade maps, not hand-drawn maps, not some of the stuff that I've been shown. I think it's a real problem. And I hope that these trade lands, all of the other ones, get back online as soon as possible for the general public, because again, that is all we have as trade from a lot of these CWMU operators. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thanks, Travis. The last one will be Gary Webb, who is the North Peak CWMU operator.
Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, we appreciate the division and their apology. We're here with a bunch of this happening because of a mistake that we also were alerted to in February at the same meeting that Chad was. So our process started last year wanting to put this land into our CWMU. It's the same landowner. It's within 1.5 miles of the existing CWMU. It's the same deer herd. We're not asking for more permits. This is the kind of request that makes sense. And this request falls inside the current rule. Unfortunately, there was an error on a map. The trade land issue can be heard in November, and we can go through that process and walk through details on that, which we'll be able to talk about. This request was we had a biologist go out with us. We went through the whole process, and in preparation for incorporating our land into our CWMU, we posted it last year in the fall, so that as people pass through some of the roads that are open road, they would know that remind them that this is private land, because some of it had not been posted for a while, and some spots in years, because it had been in Elk CWMU and not on an interior border. So that's why, Randy, you saw no trespassing signs in the fall. Remember, we had no idea until this February that this ground was showing on a trade land clickable map. When we found out, we worked with Chad. He's talked about his process he went through to get this changed. At the end of the day, this makes sense. And when the rule gets revisited, and if non-contiguous land gets discussed in the rule, who knows what's going to come out of that committee rule. We stood as an association at the Wildlife Board and supported reviewing the rule and coming up with ideas, and however that plays out. But as the rule stands today, this request fits inside the rule, and that's why we're calling it a request. I know there's different words, but we, at the Central RAC, the Assistant Attorney General stood up a month ago and clarified that this falls inside the rule because he was questioned. Same thing that Chad did. We just heard it now. And this makes sense. We're not trying to put a bunch of more tags on the landscape. We're still trying to manage the resource. It's within 1.5 miles. It's our property, deeded property. And if we don't incorporate it into our CWMU, there will be nobody hunting it this year. It will be locked down until we can pull it into the CWMU. However, this fits the rule, and this makes sense. We're not trying to randomly select parcels of ground. This is our land. This is land where there's been water work done over the years. There's been fields at one time where they were cutting grass and fencing up. And so we're in favor of it. We feel horrible that this has happened. This is undue pressure on us, the landowner especially, who dates back into the 60s on this property, into the posted hunting units. They were one of the original groups to do a PHU. It rolled into CWMUs. In all of those years, there has never been a single complaint land in front of the advisory committee on this CWMU, from myself, from the landowners who have owned it for years. This is a great CWMU. It manages the resource well and takes care of the public hunters who have a very high satisfaction and harvest rate. So that's where we stand. Again, we appreciate the apology, and we also are sensitive to what we've heard. But at the end of the day, this falls within the rule, and really it makes sense. So I'm available to answer questions, Justin, if you decide you want to do that. That's why I'm here. So
I'll see what the RAC wants to do. Thank you.
thank you, guys.
Okay, that is our last public comment card. I'm going to open up for comments from the RAC and discussion on this item.
Myself, I feel really conflicted. I see different points of view on this that I think all these different points of view are valid. But at the end of the day, I'm inclined to be against it. I feel I'm a fairly black and white sort of person. And if just variance after variance after variance, I'm against it. I like the CWMU.
So we've got let's make sure we know, we have two different variances we're speaking about. And so I want to make sure we have the North Peaks and we also have the Venequin Canyon one. And so while we're discussing these, maybe let's discuss, since we have Mr. Webb here, let's discuss this North Peaks one first. And then when we look at motions, we can decide how we want to do that. Sorry to interrupt you, but I thought we better make that clear. Sorry, I didn't cut you off. I apologize.
I have a comment.
Yes.
I say if it falls within the rule, that's the rule. That's your black and white.
Yeah, I guess my comment is just a comment that if it was known in February that there was an issue and this came through to our RAC last month, we passed this last, I think 9-1. I think there was one against it, if I remember, maybe two. I don't remember the exact vote, but then it came back. My comment, it would have been, if we were aware of these issues, I do wish maybe it would have been brought to light sooner than coming back the second. I know that's why it did end up being taken off the agenda, started over, but that's something that I want to recognize that we voted for this once. There is a new element to it, but at the end of the day, it doesn't change what the request is. It just added more mud to the water.
I'd like to elaborate on the comment. I do appreciate it coming through this process. It's been discussed that there's two ways it could have been handled. I do like, for lack of a better word, the transparency of it being out. I think that goes a long ways towards clarifying some other conversations that have gone on in the past.
Brad.
I've gone back and forth with this one a number of times, and not to belabor the point, I really look forward to the rule finally coming up for review. As often as we review all the other rules, this one's been 20 or 30 years here. So there's a lot of things that I think need to be addressed. I'm glad it came to light. It's unfortunate the process it came through. That being said, I went back and read through what the rule states there. On one hand, it's not clear enough to say yes or no, in my opinion, which leaves it open to come through as a request or a variance or whatever we want to call it. Where it's the same landowner being included in there. If it was a different landowner, I would probably have much more heartache, and I think probably the CWMU committee would have as well. I tend to fall on the side of supporting this one for North Peaks. And know there's some concern of, does it set a precedence and other things, but it's not the only one that has non-contiguous acres in it in the state. And so I guess with the prospect of the rule coming through, there's a lot of things we can address here that this has brought to light, including non-contiguous acres. But as it stands today, the feedback that in the previous meeting a month ago, where Kyle spoke to it from the Attorney General's office and their interpretation, we are within the bounds of the rule as it's written. And so I don't think we're out of line if we do approve it. And I think that's where it kind of comes to for me. There's parts of it that I'm not a fan of, but it's more based around the CWMU rule.
I think if you flesh it right down to the actual rule, it's the obviously non-contiguous, but we have 12 other CWMUs that also have non-contiguous acreage within the confines of their CWMU. It's the same land ownership, like you mentioned. For me, I'd be more inclined to pass it based on the fact that it is within the rule. It is the same landowner. But to speak to Travis's comments, I'd also like some definition, because I couldn't find anything that tells you, non-contiguous. Will non-contiguous a half a mile, non-contiguous a mile, non-contiguous a county unit? That I think will all get fleshed out in the rule committee. I think that we can kind of clean that up a bit, but I don't think it's necessarily applicable to this specific scenario. So that's kind of where I'm at.
I agree. I think the public sentiment is loud and clear that this needs to be addressed. And I think the RAC, I've spoken with many of you today. I think we all agree with that. I think things that are on the table, identify a boundary. There's so many things have changed since these terms went away. Our Onyx, our maps, our GPS. So it's a great program. And when this rule was set in place, it worked. These definable boundaries, these different things, the trade line. I think all of this needs to be addressed in this. And that's why I believe our wildlife board was very adamant last month on making sure that this was an action item and that the division was tasked, that a committee put in place, and that they present the rule in June of 25. And when I first heard that, I didn't like that, but I started looking at the process, what it takes to get people on that committee and what it's going to take to meet and to get, I think that's a fair date.
I look at it and what's the benefit to the public? And it was explained, Chad explained it, no one would hunt this property if it's not included. This does give the opportunity for a public draw individual to be able to hunt that property. Otherwise, it's closed. So, I've looked at this and looked at it, and I always look at where's the benefit and who's winning. There are some questions that need to be answered, and I think that they'll be addressed and answered down the road. But I see absolutely no reason not to pass this request.
All right, I was just gonna say, we're discussing this one. Do we want to?
Yeah, I'll just limit my conversation to this one. One, I want to stress, this is private property. They have every right to post this property and not let anyone hunt on it. I was surprised how many public comments were disgusted that they couldn't hunt on it. It's not their property. These people have every right to post this property. I have real heartburn with adding it. I don't think it applies. I don't think it's the rule. That's why we're debating how to word it. But I can't see how we give this nice clean boundary that adds 2,000 public acres onto this, and then throw in these other pieces that are 1.5 miles away. It makes sense to me if this is coming up, the renewal's coming up this November. This is an easy fix. I don't know why this isn't just addressed when this comes up in November. For that reason, I would be against adding it on. This is an easy fix. All we have to do is wait, 6 months? And it's not going to affect this hunting season. And public hunters, this is one hunter. There's no cow tags, there's no doe tags. This is one public hunter. For 2,000 acres.
Might be where that big elk is.
Okay. Does anyone feel that we haven't discussed this particular agenda or this variance for the North Peaks? We feel like I have, I'd entertain a motion on the specific variance for this. Okay.
I would say, well, I would vote or make a motion to accept the North Peaks request or variance with the understanding that when the Rules Committee convenes, that their ruling would supersede our recommendation from this RAC. And then this would not be a grandfathered approval. This would be an approval of the variance and request, but would not supersede the Rule Committee changing something at a later date.
I'll second that.
Okay.
Just to clarify, the committee would make the recommendation and the board would make the change. So not to supersede the board's decision on the rule.
Our recommendation tonight would not supersede anything the Rules Committee did when they convene. So we have the Rules Committee and they come in and determine that this non-contiguous acres is an unacceptable, it will override what we decide here today.
Possibility of grandfather is what we want to.
I want to avoid the grandfather thing that
Automatically.
because we approved it here tonight, I don't want it to necessarily stick if the Rule Committee decides something else.
I think that's clear with everyone, and we had a second from Brad. Any other discussion on the motion? I'm going to call for a vote. Before we start, Emily is back on. Okay. Ryan?
No.
Brad?
Yes.
Jamie?
I'm abstaining.
Okay. Paul?
Yes.
David?
Yes.
Randy?
No.
Emily?
Yes.
Matt?
Yes.
Mike?
Yes.
Kevin?
Yes.
Darren?
Yes.
Don't believe Casey's on here. Nikki?
Yes.
Yes. Motion passes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 to 2. And one abstention, correct. Okay, I'll give the opportunity for both Ryan and then Randy to express their reason for voting against the motion.
I like the CWMU system. I like that it allows public to have a chance to hunt land that clearly they wouldn't be able to otherwise. But also I'm tired of what my perception is exception and exception and exception. I want to wait until the process in November plays out.
Okay.
Yeah, just what I said before. This is an easy fix in November. It doesn't make sense to me to do it now.
Okay. Now let's discuss the Evanequin Canyon. I feel like maybe, hopefully everyone, when we were here a month ago, this came through. Does anyone want a refresher on this, or do we feel confident with the knowledge that you have on this particular CWMU and what their variance was?
Multiple exposures to information is a proven and instructional strategy.
Okay. All right. Chad?
Yeah, you want me to just recap this one?
Yes.
Yeah, so Evanequin is it's a CWMU in the Northeast region. It's under 10,000 acres. A few years back, they went in and asked for a variance to become an elk CWMU. That went through the CWMU Advisory Committee and the Wildlife Board and was approved to be an elk CWMU. They have some land, non-contiguous land that's just over a half mile away that they'd like to add into the CWMU. And much like this land, it's otherwise it's posted as no trespassing, no hunting. It won't be hunted on this fall unless it is in the CWMU. Then it would potentially be hunted by the public hunter and the CWMU hunters.
Okay, if I recall, there was already been one variance to the CWMU to meet the acreage required to become was it the elk CWMU? For elk CWMU. This variance would now allow them to meet it without the previous, but if we were to take that out, then it doesn't meet it again, and so this one doesn't pass the smell test as well as the other one to me. But anyway, I'll let.
Justin, can I clarify on that real quick? That my original presentation was that and I think that was what was passed on to by the biologist, was when I went back and did the math, this non-contiguous actually still doesn't get them to 10,000. So that it'd actually still be under. And I know a lot of people have troubles with it being 2 variances, but either way, like if they don't get the non-contiguous, they're still going to be an elk CWMU. So to me, it's more looking at it holistically of should we add the additional, allow them to have additional land to hunt or not? But it's not going to affect what the variance that they already have. There'll be an elk CWMU either way, I guess.
Okay.
So I'm assuming we're just doing comments on this one. Yeah. And I'll repeat what I said last time. And Chad, I appreciate you bringing that up. We screwed up once, why screw up again? I mean, a variance on top of a variance, it doesn't make any sense. I don't understand doing this. I don't understand why to compound it. We made one, in my opinion, we made one mistake already, giving them an elk variance when they didn't meet it. They still don't meet it, but we're going to give them what they're asking for anyway. Why do we have any rules?
Can I ask a question on the density of elk in this unit? Because I can get behind them if they're a couple acres short, yet they hold a tremendous amount of animals, and it's helping with management, and it's also possibly helping with getting public to be able to hunt elk on there. Is there a high number of elk on this unit? You're on mute, I think, or something.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't know if I'm in a good position to talk about the elk densities there. It's a CWMU that's been highly rated, so I know that they do a good job taking care of the customers or the public hunters. I also believe on this one, and maybe this is not super relevant, but I don't even think they sell a tag on this one. I think everything they do is Wounded Warriors, charity type hunts. But yeah, I can't speak specifically to the elk densities on that. So they're at 9,477 acres right now.
And for clarification, when they come to the CWMU advisory committee, they bring the biologist with them, and the biologist supports it prior to the committee even getting to comment on it. They bring them on their behalf, and they'll make a case for elk density, opportunity, whatever the case may be. But it's generally a division person that helps with that recommendation.
So yeah, and I'll just talk on that, Mike, real quick. Is generally our recommendation on anything under acreage is the division recommendation is to not approve it. But we, as Mike's saying that, but our biologists do speak to if it were an elk CWMU, or would it be able to, how many tags would it be able to hold? So right now in this one, it's 4 tags, three private, 1 public. And the biologist did speak to that of saying, yeah, it could support that amount of hunting.
Chad, does it meet rule?
What's that?
Does it meet rule? Is there any violation of any rule if we approve it?
This is the same as the last as far as non-contiguous goes. It's that same principle of it could be argued whether it's a request or a variance. Once again, we're bringing it through as a variance because we feel like it doesn't typically fit what a CWMU looks like. And for transparency and for input, we wanted to take it through this public process. So yeah, it's rule that it can be here. But even with that, like the variance for it to be an elk CWMU, that's also in rule. The rule says you can ask for a variance, and it goes through those steps. So even though generally on most of them, honestly, most of them don't get the variance granted, especially on the under acreage stuff. They usually don't get it granted. But there is that allowance. And I would say one of the factors is usually on the under acreage of when they will get it approved is a scenario like a Venequin Canyon that they don't have any way to get to 10,000 contiguous acres. There's no other private land that touches that CWMU. So it would be impossible for them to be an elk CWMU without that variance. And I know the CWMU Advisory Committee takes that into account.
Is this ground that they're looking to add, what is the makeup? Is there multiple owners in this, landowners in the CWMU? And does this land belong to the same owner, similar to like what we just approved with North Peaks?
Yeah, from what I understand from the biologist, Eric, is that it's the same. It's I can't remember Mike's last name, but Mike is the owner or leases it. I don't remember which one, but I believe it's the same controlling person over all of it.
I think for me on this one, it's the 4 tags and the non-contiguous. You know what I mean? It's not like they're trying to shoot 10 elk.
Mm-hmm.
And the biologist did support it, and that's why the committee went the way they did.
I think this also will be addressed again in November as well. Is there any other discussion or thoughts or questions before it? I mean, I think similar but different.
I know which way this is going to go, but I'm going to point out every case we've talked about is because we're giving exceptions. I mean, well, we've done it 12 other times. Let's do it again.
Okay. I think we've had enough discussion. Let's.
I'll make a motion that we accept the request as presented.
I'll second.
I have a request to accept the Venequin motion as presented. Variance as presented, and that was by Kevin and a second by Mike. I get to call for a vote? Ryan?
No.
Brad?
Yes.
Jamie?
Abstain.
Paul?
Yes.
Dave?
Yes.
Randy?
No.
Emily?
Yes.
Matt?
Yes.
Mike?
Yes.
Kevin?
Yes.
Darren?
Yes.
And Nikki?
Yes.
Same result. Motion passes 9-2 with 1 abstention. You want to share that? I'm guessing it's the same comment, but I think it's fair to let you say it, or whatever it is.
Same sentiments as last time.
Just what I commented on.
Okay. Thank you. That, a lot of effort was put in by I want to say thank you to all of our RAC members, the amount of time, effort put into trying to come up with the best motions and things that we feel will benefit all involved in Utah wildlife. So with that, we're to our last agenda item. We'll be calling for an election. We'll have an election of a new RAC chair and a new vice chair. And many of you know there's four of us that'll be going off the RAC this year. Do you want me to I'll turn the time over to you.
Okay. Yeah, so we have 4 RAC members. Matt Clark, Justin Oliver, Kevin McLeod, and Mike Lauder will be rolling off the RAC. So we'll be selecting replacements for them to start in July. the recruitment process for those replacements ends at the end of this month. So there's a advertisement out there for new RAC members. But for tonight, we do need to select a new chair and vice chair. In rule, we set that the chair and vice chair will serve for a 2-year period. So tonight, we'll make that decision, but consistent with the way the other regions handle it as well, we sent out an email asking you guys to send in nominations for both of those positions. I received 2 nominations, one for Brad for chair and the other for Ryan for vice chair. So that's all we received. If there are no other nominations, we have just a little written ballot in front of you. If you could just fill out that ballot quickly, we'll collect those up and see if they win or not.
Let's make sure this ballot counting is legal.
I know. I'm just confirming nobody wrote any funny jokes that I need to share. But it's possible the chair will break the tie on this one.
That happened.
Okay. And it's unanimous. So starting in 2 years, Brad will be the chair starting in July for the next 2 years, and Ryan will be the vice chair for 2 years. Thank you for stepping up and congratulations. But yeah. I know. And I just want to say thanks to the outgoing RAC members. This is not an easy job. And you guys, all 4 of you guys have just continued to show up. You've done the homework. You've been engaged. You've been thoughtful. You've reached out to employees. You've spent time with them in the field. I just can't express the appreciation that we have for the time that you've spent with us and the time that you've given to the public. And also big appreciation to Justin and Kevin for your service in the chair and vice chair. As a token of our appreciation, we'll have bronze prints for you. I do have some currently available, but I want to give you the opportunity to choose which one you want that you like best. And we'll make sure that you guys get copies of those prints because that's the least we can do for everything that you've given.
And then we have Paul leaving us as well.
In addition, we have 2 federal agency representatives. I have tried many, many times to convince Paul to stay because I think that the rule would allow for it, but he is so exhausted on Wednesday nights that, how long have you been on? 8 years, right? So Paul will be replaced by a new Forest Service representative that's been selected by the forest. And Paul, you've been just a mainstay for years. You've been a stable presence always, kind and professional voice on the RAC that you've just always been a good friend too for my whole career. We won't share the trouble we almost got into. It's the first time I've ever heard the term shaking in my boots, but thank you for everything you've given, Paul, on behalf of the forest. The forest should be really proud of the service and representative that you've been here.
Emily as well, is that?
Emily is going to remain with us.
Oh, awesome.
For the time being. So they're seeing quite a bit of turnover there. And so we're lucky to keep Emily. Unless there's some new positions filled, then we'll discuss some changeover there. But Emily's filling 1 million roles right now in the midst of 1 million different vacancies at the BLM. So,
and being a new mother.
And being a new mother, she's stepped away momentarily a couple of times to put a baby asleep and so on. So we're glad we can help accommodate because that's more important than anything.
All right. With that, I think meeting's adjourned. Thank you, everyone.